Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Cook. I'm the chairman of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. I'd like to welcome everyone to day one of our two-day meeting here in Memphis. Today is our committee day, so the committee members will be discussing and possibly voting on issues, and then tomorrow is the full commission day. So if we have any guests here and you'd like to speak, come to the microphone, state your name, where you're from, and if you represent any organization. And we give everyone 3 minutes to speak, and when we get to 1 minute left, and that will let you know you have 1 minute to wrap it up and give time for other folks to speak. So, and also please silence your cell phones. I'm talking to you, Commissioner Cox, or Box. So, both. But, let's go with a roll call now, please, Danette.
Angie Box. Here. Bill Cox.
Here.
Dennis Gardner.
Here.
Connie King. Here. Tony Sanders.
Here.
James Stroud.
Here.
Bill Swan.
Here.
Kent Woods.
Here.
Jamie Woodson. Here. Brian McLaren. Here. Kurt Holbert. Here. Jeff Cook. Here. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Danette. Any announcements or comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I've got one. I've just for a second personal privilege. My older son, William, is in the audience today. We're glad to have him.
William, welcome. My wife and my wife Julie joined us, so welcome. Director Carter, any comments? Well, I'd like to call on you then for our next presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. First of all, I'd like to just, we echoed those comments in kind of out of order here a while ago when we were not in formal session, just to formally thank Ducks Unlimited for having us here, and what a great venue and the way they opened their doors to us. And we all have been family for a long time, and it's just really great to be here with them and be able to participate in the meeting that we kind of move all over the state. But anyway, it's been great, and we appreciate Dale Hall and all the members of the DU staff here that have done that. But going on to, if I could make just a few comments about Dale Hall, the CEO of Ducks Unlimited. You know, I've often heard Johnny Morris on several different occasions when he was opening a new store or whatever, would talk about heroes in conservation. And it's an apt title for a lot of people in this room, and the people that live and work and enjoy wildlife resources and all of its many aspects. This is a perfect opportunity for everybody in this room to feel like a hero of conservation. And there are some people that really stand out as their career has made such a difference as it gone across a span of time in several different roles. And one of those is Dale Hall and what he has done for Ducks Unlimited. I've had a great privilege to work with Dale in several of his different capacities. He was with the Fish and Wildlife Service for a few years and eventually became director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that role, of course, was into so many different aspects of what we all do. But not only does he have the same kind of problems there, or issues I would call, and some of the things where we all deal with differing philosophies, the different stresses on wildlife management, especially in terms of species management and endangered species and all the public opinion that goes with those. Then he also had, of course, the international side, and Ducks Unlimited, of course, is still in that role as it deals with Mexico and Canada and specifically in our north, in the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and all those things. But anyway, it's a wide-ranging thing, and several thousand employees, and that, when Dale left that, we were all very lucky to have him join Ducks Unlimited as the CEO. And over the last number of years has done a remarkable job of keeping it as one of the elite conservation organizations, not only in this country, but recognized internationally in several different venues across the world. So with that, I know, Mr. Chairman, we have talked in the past, along with the members of the commission and members of the agency, we recognize that sometimes it's time for a person to look at a different venue, and one that Dale is looking at is he thinks he's going to retire at the end of June. I can't imagine that actually happening. I can't think that he's going to sit down and do anything, but in any case, he will be leaving as the CEO of Ducks Unlimited at that time. So it gives us an opportunity to come together here to recognize him for what he's done. And in that respect, we have a resolution that we'd like to present that I know the commission has already seen, but I would like to make it public. And if I could read that now in honor of Dale. Whereas the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and Mr. Dale Hall, Chief Executive Officer of Ducks Unlimited Incorporated, have held a long partnership in the conservation of waterfowl and wetlands conservation. And whereas Mr. Dale Hall joined Ducks Unlimited in 2010, bringing with him vast conservation knowledge and experience to an established and internationally recognized 80-year-old conservation organization. And whereas Mr. Hall is in the final year of leading an unprecedented campaign to raise more than $2 billion for wetlands conservation across North America, and whereas the campaign is the largest ever in the history of conservation by a non-governmental organization, and under Mr. Hall's direction, Ducks Unlimited is poised to meet and exceed this historic challenge. And whereas the continued conservation efforts shared by the TWRA and Ducks Unlimited and Mr. Hall produce a wide range of benefits for society, hunters, wildlife viewers, anglers, and many other outdoor recreationists. And whereas the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, Mr. Hall, and Ducks Unlimited embrace and celebrate our waterfowl hunting heritage and strive to share the many benefits of an outdoor lifestyle with future generations. And whereas the TWRA, Mr. Hall, and Ducks Unlimited believe the personal connection between people and wildlife helps strengthen the conservation foundation of our nation. And whereas prior to joining Ducks Unlimited, Mr. Hall had a distinguished 31-year career with United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the last 4 as director, as appointed by George W. Bush. And whereas as director, he was responsible for approximately 7,500 Fish and Wildlife Service employees located in the national headquarters and in 9 regional offices. And whereas Mr. Hall's long career with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, he served in numerous roles at field office, regional, and national levels. And whereas during his time with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, developed a strong relationship with the TWRA and has continued into that role with Ducks Unlimited. And whereas while serving as Deputy Assistant Director for Fisheries in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C., he played a major role in developing the services policy for management of the nation's fisheries facilities, including the service of 75 fish hatcheries, 48 fish and wildlife management assistance offices, 4 technology development centers, and 11 fish health centers. Whereas Mr. Hall has authored numerous informative documents in regard to wetlands, fisheries, ecology, and other topics. He's also taught classes on wetlands identification and declination. Now, therefore, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Commission and the Wildlife Resources Agency do jointly proclaim sincere appreciation for his close bond and the working relationship with Mr. Dale Hall through the many years of seeking and achieving solid wildlife management principles in general, and in testimony thereof, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Commission, meeting in regular session in Memphis, Tennessee, Thursday, January the 17th, have caused to be affixed the Great Seal of the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. Mr. Chairman, I would offer that as a resolution for consideration by this commission.
Take that form of motion. I have a second. Second. All in favor of the resolution, let them know by saying aye.
Aye.
And obviously none opposed. Passes.
We even went so far as to have it framed. So if, Dale, if you wouldn't mind joining us up here, we'd certainly appreciate that.
Well, I always knew Ed was sneaky. I do want to thank you all so much for this, but I'd really like to come back and end it by emphasizing that it's never an I, it's always a we. None of us can do it alone. It takes all of us to get it done, and it's truly been an honor through my 40 to 45-year career to work with people like you and the people that are out on the ground making it happen. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for this very kind honor.
And Dale, on the behalf of the commission and me personally, I want to thank you and everyone at Ducks Unlimited for all you've done for waterfowl conservation the last 80 years. And since duck hunting is my favorite type of hunting, I shudder to think of what it would be like without what you've done. It'd probably go the way of quail, and I'm glad it's not done that. And I'd probably have much more money in the bank and maybe retired by now if I hadn't duck hunted, but I also wouldn't have all those great memories in the blind with my family and friends. So I thank you for that. My only criticism to Ducks Unlimited, though, and maybe we need to increase our funding, our contribution, is that y'all didn't do a very good job with the weather this year. So if you could, whatever we need to do. So. So I'd like to recognize Scott Manley for the Rice Stewardship Program.
Thank you. You guys got to admit that's kind of a hard thing to follow right there. So, Dale, you've been an awesome boss and supervisor over all the years and made us an environment that we can be successful. So thank you, lots. I hadn't got a chance to meet the commission this formal in the past, but Scott Manley, I'm the Director of Conservation Programs for Ducks Unlimited in Jackson, Mississippi. And along with Tim Willis, we are actually the on-the-ground liaisons to your staff with Jamie and Joe and the rest of the crowd on doing the work here in the state. So I would like to, thanks for this chance. I'm actually here today to talk to you about an agricultural program, our rice stewardship program that we do here throughout the MAV. But I want to say that your staff is awesome to work with, responsive, knowledgeable, and most importantly, we can plan and follow through with those plans. And for us to be a successful partner, that's critical. So y'all are awesome to work with and very, very good staff. So why is rice that important to waterfowl or to Ducks Unlimited? We call it the working wetlands, if you will. And throughout the Gulf Coast, California, and the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, that rice is one of the most important wetland types that's out there because of the food it provides. And our research has shown that about a third of the calories, 35% of the calories consumed in those 3 priority regions are rice, which is kind of funny because about a third of the calories that are consumed on this planet every day by humans is rice. So rice is important to all of us. And the rice industry is a invaluable habitat, for us in those really important regions. We've always worked good with the rice industry, but in the I'll tell you what really happened is we had an oil spill. And the emergency response to that oil spill had a lot to do with providing extra rice habitat to keep the birds out of the coastal zone that had been affected by the oil, and really made us appreciate our relationship we had with rice agriculture. And from that time, that was 2010 that happened. In 2012, we joined forces with the USA Rice, which is the kind of like the American Soybean Association for rice, the advocacy group at the DC level and state levels. And we decided we're going to work strong, hand in hand together to make the rice industry just more vibrant for the future, because we need that habitat base that's out there. About the next thing that came along is in 2014, we got a new farm bill, and of course we just got a new one a couple of months ago, but that new farm bill asked for these kind of partnerships where conservation and agriculture and the whole supply chain, everything from the seed salesman to Kellogg's Rice Krispies, the whole supply chain would invest in this as a group, as a unified effort in making your agriculture and your conservation stronger. So we put together this rice stewardship program, applied for all kinds of different RCPP or regional conservation partnership grants, NRCS grants over the years, and have built quite the machine, I would say, for keeping the rice industry on the ground and keeping it vibrant for waterfowl. To date, we've secured about 10 different grants with the NRCS that have a total value to the farmer, financial assistance to the farmer, of about $80 million. And we've done about 400,000 acres of conservation contracts with rice producers, and there's only about 3 million acres of rice, so we're already past the 10% mark. And we have funding in place for another 400,000 acres of conservation work over the next several years, about the next 4 or 5 years. And these projects can look anything from a big comprehensive management plan for someone whose farm's already, say, polished, improved, up to date, all the way to helping someone update their farm for irrigation, energy, water management, that sort of thing, infrastructure, capital improvements. So it's everything from detailed management down to farm rehab, farm rehabilitation, if you will. Whatever it takes to make that rice producer and his irrigated agriculture profitable, so he'll keep doing it. That's what we're after. We've also been very successful in bringing in supply chain funds, about $8 million to date, from Nestle Purina to Walmart to the ag seed companies, so on and so forth. And that's kind of the message I want to leave with you guys, is that even though rice isn't a big crop in Tennessee, Tennessee is a big agricultural state. And this same kind of supply chain partnership, if you will, can be replicated, I do believe, in other places. Also, I think your NRCS relationship is very good in Tennessee, and you've got some new, but some very good NRCS staff that are there. And I guess I'll just leave you with is, we call it our rice stewardship program, but it's really that Ducks Unlimited wants to work with agriculture. We want to work with energy. We want to work with the big land holders across the U.S. And any chances we can get to do something like this with you guys, we certainly look forward to talking about that in the future as well. I have our annual report, recent annual report here, and for the audience, there's a stack of them over here on this desk in front of Chris. And really appreciate working with your state on the ground, and thanks for letting me kind of jump into the agenda here this afternoon. Thanks.
I have a question.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
You're dealing with rice, just for my ignorance, from the very bottom of the states, Louisiana, places like that, to where it goes up. Is there different rice that you plant according to how the weather has to deal with it? Is there that kind of thing, or is it just rice?
Good question. And there are regional differences that make a producer favor certain varieties, either because of its growing season length, its tolerance to weather, cold weather, or in South Louisiana, they have a way of basically mowing the grass. They take the first crop off, and the plant sprouts a second rice head called Cajun name ratoon rice. And it takes certain varieties to be good at that too. So the varieties are as diverse as they are in corn and soybeans, but for someone that's not in the middle of ag like you and me, it all looks the same, but it's not.
It is a difference according to the weather. One other question. You live in Jackson, Mississippi.
Yes, sir.
Do you guys still hunt a place called Green Tree out of Yazoo City?
Green Tree. That name doesn't ring a bell.
Used to be flooded over.
Yeah, that name doesn't ring a bell. But Yazoo City's got plenty of water right now, I can promise you that. I thought you had them. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Scott. It is working because Commissioner Stroud and I hunt together, and last weekend, what few we shot were full of rice, so that was good.
That tells you something.
I'd like to recognize Commissioner Holbert for the Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. these are working or not. I did hear Scott mention Tim Willis's name, and I know 3 of our commissioners had a really special bonding experience riding around through Canada on a wrong turn they took. So glad to see Tim here today.
Great memories from that trip.
Great
though.
memory. I would like to call on, I'm going out of order if you've got an agenda, but I'm going to call up Jamie Feddersen, our waterfowl coordinator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I am going to be previewing for you agency recommendations for migratory game bird hunting seasons and regulations. These will be for the 2019-2020 season. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our efforts to engage the public on how they feel about our migratory game bird seasons, and then we traditionally, when I'm up here talking to you about this, I break it down into 3 groups. We'll talk about the early season migratory game birds. Those are pretty much everything other than ducks, geese, and cranes, and we've got some recommended changes to those season dates. We'll talk about ducks, geese, and cranes. We've got season dates and bag limits that we'll talk about, and then we've got some season dates for hunting with raptors. October 15th through November 15th is our traditional time period where we solicit input, actively solicit input from the public on migratory game bird regulations. We have also this year, based on some late information we got from the Fish and Wildlife Service, some things that we could do with our duck seasons, and so we decided to put together a public opinion poll. It was really just sort of we threw some questions together, got it out as quickly as we could, so I'll certainly preface that the results on this that's why we're calling it a poll and not a survey. There's no scientific validity to this, but it's just, we really just wanted to get the pulse of what people were thinking. And of course, we generally get this out through news release, social media, our website. That's how we kind of broadcast this out. So during our active solicitation period, the October and November, we only received 15 comments on migratory game bird seasons, and those they ranged from changes in woodcock and crow seasons to most of them were things that had to do with WMAs and access to WMAs and things like that. But we do receive a lot of input during our January, February general hunting comment period. Those just sort of get forwarded over to me when they deal with a migratory game bird question. They get forwarded over to me, and I hold on to them and take those into consideration for when we get further on in the calendar, and I start reviewing those. And we got 49, so that would have been last January, February is when we got those. And again, they're mainly WMA access. Let's move the duck season into February, things that sometimes we just can't do based on federal rules. Our public opinion poll, I was pretty pleased for as quickly as we got it out and as short a time as we had it out. We had 3,850 people respond to it, which I thought was spectacular. I was really happy with that number. And of course, all of our recommendations are built upon consultation with other staff within the Wildlife and Forestry Division, and of course law enforcement. We talk with them as well. So we'll start out with the early season migratory game birds, and this is the list of species that we generally consider in this group. There were no changes to any of the federal frameworks, meaning nothing really that we had to change. Mostly what we're dealing with here is calendar dates, but specifically for woodcock and crow, we ended up receiving a lot of comments about those particular seasons. Even starting last year, during this process that we had last year, I remember, I think it was Commissioner Holbert was asking about some of maybe it might have been the crow season. I think maybe somebody got a hold of you. I couldn't remember if it was crow or woodcock, but we started getting questions about it last year. So we did some work, and we talked about it and talked to the hunters about it, and I'll just let you know that, so currently the way we have our season set there is that we open up on the second Saturday in November. run it through the fourth Monday in December. And that's a 45-day season. That's how we're limited by federal frameworks. We can't exceed 45 days of a season for woodcock. Our stakeholder input, especially from our hunters in East Tennessee, that they see a lot of their woodcock in late December and January. And so if we do that, if you look at when they're getting their birds and the way our season is set, they're missing a lot of opportunity to hunt birds. So in talking with folks at the Fish and Wildlife Service and looking at the frameworks, we were able to offer a split season on woodcock. So we got to thinking, man, that might be the way to solve this problem. We can't do a zone for woodcock, but we can do a split season, and maybe we can put some days in early November that's when the bulk of the birds are moving through West Tennessee, and we can put some in January when they're moving through East Tennessee. And so we asked our woodcock hunters, what do you think about a split season? We had 222 people identify themselves as woodcock hunters. And so to put that into perspective for you, our estimate that we get from the Fish and Wildlife Service of the number of woodcock hunters we have in the state, we have 1,280 woodcock hunters in the state. So you get 222, that's 17% of our woodcock hunters. So we got a fairly good number out of there. But 67% of the folks that responded were in support of a split season. You know, you can see the numbers 26, no change. That 7% other, those were folks that offered things like, no, we really need to hunt in February. Again, things outside of the frameworks, things that we can't do. So taking all of that into consideration, we decided that a split season would be probably the best option for hunters woodcock hunters in Tennessee, and we're recommending changing the woodcock season to a split season where phase one would open for 23 consecutive days beginning the second Saturday in November. That puts the bulk of a good chunk of days for those folks in West Tennessee. That's when they get their birds. Phase two, we'd offer up the other 22 days then, running from January 1st to January 31st. January 31st being the latest day that we can have a woodcock season according to federal frameworks. The other species that we had some discussion about was crow season change. We were surprised at how much input that I got on changing a crow season. Who knew? So just to show you what our current season is, June 1st through February 28th. I mean, we have a really long season, but we only hunt on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So what folks indicated to us is that they wanted more days in the cooler months. Specifically, they wanted more days in October and November. So again, we put it out on the public poll. We asked them what they thought about that, and we asked them where they would want to place their, did they want to change, and would they want to place where they wanted to place their hunting days. And so out of 861 people who identified themselves as crow hunters, and I don't have an estimate of how many crow hunters we have. It's just that's not a piece that anybody of information that anybody's grabbing. So I can't tell you the percentage of crow hunters that number is, but I imagine it's probably pretty high. But 65% of those people who identified themselves as crow hunters would like to see a change in the season. And so knowing that, and in discussions with staff in the division, we felt it was really important to maintain some days in those warmer months, that June 1st through August 25th period, because there's a lot of farmers that are growing sweet corn, and that's a time when crows can be a real problem. So we wanted to make sure we left that opportunity open to help those hunters. You can see in phase two, we're putting no day restriction. So it's going to be open from October 5th through November 24th, no day restriction. So that puts a lot of days in those cooler months, in the time when crow hunters told us they wanted. And then we also wanted to keep a bunch of days in December through February, a time when maybe some other people, where they're winding down off of some other hunting seasons, but folks still want to get out and maybe shoot some crow or something. They have the opportunity to do that. So that would be our recommendation, is to split the crow season into 3 phases, as you see there. So the next couple of slides are really just what the 2019-2020 season dates would be for these particular species. You've already seen the woodcock and crow, but the snipe is in there in the middle. No change there. And then we've also got our early wood duck and teal seasons and our rail and moorhen and gallinule seasons. No changes on these. These are when they typically would fall out on the calendar for us. And then dove season. Again, no changes here, really just calendar dates in phase 2. You know, the way we have it set up is the second Saturday in October. You know, September 1st through the 28th is a static. December 8th through the January 15th is static. The other one, phase 2, is dynamic, but that's those are what the dates would be for next year. So moving on to our next big group, the waterfowl and coots, and of course we're going to talk about the geese in there as well. And you'll note at the bottom it says some changes in federal frameworks. There were definitely some things that happened on the federal level that some of the things we have to change, and there's one thing that we can change, but we don't necessarily need to. So currently, the big discussion for us is going to be, or with staff, it was, you know, currently the framework allows us the last day that we can have a duck season, a duck hunt is no later than the last Sunday in January, and it's been that way for a long time. I can't remember a time when it hasn't been that. So, and through efforts that we have had, I say we, biologists within the Mississippi Flyway, all of the states within the Mississippi Flyway, we've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service for a lot of years, trying to push that to January 31st. We've done a lot of modeling over the past few years, looking at different packages and how maybe a January 31st date would affect duck populations and harvest and things like that. But so I think we're at the point where we've gotten the Fish and Wildlife Service comfortable with moving away from that last Sunday in January. I just wanted to show you this real quick before we move on, but this is, if we stayed with the current framework, this is what our season would look like. We would end on that last Sunday in January, which is the 26th, and you count back 58 days, and we still have those 2 days around Thanksgiving. But and so you get a total of 10 weekends under this current structure the way we have it. But again, with our discussions, we anticipate, now I say we anticipate the framework will allow us to put our season no later than January 31st, simply because we're in a government shutdown. I wasn't sure if any of you were aware of that. But that has impacted the ability of states to talk with the Fish and Wildlife Service folks, and it has also prevented things that they might normally need to publish, like proposed frameworks. Those things haven't gone out. So what we really kind of wait on and base our recommendations on, that document hasn't come out. However, we've had a lot of consultation with folks leading up to the shutdown, and every indication we get is that this is what the framework will be, is that we will get no later than January 31st as an ending framework. So we decided to move forward on that and get things going and offer that up to our hunters if they wanted it. So again, we put that out on the poll. I was pretty happy. We got about 3,600 duck hunters that responded. And to put that into perspective, we have our 2017 estimate of duck hunters was about 17,000 or so. So that puts us at about 27% of our duck hunters responded to the poll. And of that 27%, of the 3,600 that responded, 83% wanted a change in the season. And so let's look at some of the things that we offered them and what they said that they wanted to do. The first package that we offered them was to end on January 31st, and then we would just count back 58 days. So again, we traditionally have our 2 days right around Thanksgiving, and then we close the season for a while, and then we open up again for our phase 2. So if you count back, if you end on the 31st and you count back 58 days, you will always have your phase 2 start on December 5th. December 5th doesn't always fall on a Saturday. And so if you look at the way the calendar is going to fall out, especially for next year, things are really late next year. You look at Thanksgiving, it's real late in November. If you look at where the 31st is, it's a Friday, so it's really late. So if you count back 58 days. You're starting on a Thursday, but you're only getting 9 weekends out of that the way the calendar falls out. Another package that we offered them. Oh, and I should let you know that 36% of the people who said they wanted a change, this is what they chose. The other package we offered was, okay, well, let's end on the 31st. We'll count back to a point where we'll start on a Saturday, because maybe a Saturday opener is really important for folks. And then we would just take those extra days, not I'd say extra days, but take those unused days, so those December 5th and December 6th day, and just add those to the end of our phase 1. So phase 1 would be a couple days longer next year. Phase 2 would be a couple days shorter, but you'd open up on a Saturday and you'd still end on the 31st. And you're still only getting 9 weekends out of it, but 52% of the folks that said they wanted to change, this is what they wanted. The other, 8% or so, we got the, no, we want to end in February, things outside the frameworks that we can't do. So really the two big options that we had were these. We were going to recommend going with this, but we decided that we're going to do a slight modification to this. Because if you look at this first one, you'll see that phase 1 would open up on the 4th Saturday. That's how we have it written in our proclamation now, that phase 1 would open up on the 4th Saturday of November. Well, the way our deer hunting, our big game proclamation is written is that the opening of general gun is the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So we would have an issue there. You'd have general gun for deer opening up on the same day as duck season. And we know from the past that that's not real popular with a lot of folks. So our recommendation is going to be we open up on the weekend after Thanksgiving, but we're recommending to open up on a Friday. We considered the Friday after Thanksgiving virtually a free day because kids are out of school, a lot of people are not working, so that might be, and what it did is it allowed us to shift that phase 1 a day sooner, so we'd have a 4-day split rather than a 3-day split. So we really worked and massaged this particular one, and we're not going to have to do that every year. It's just the way the calendar falls this year with January 31st being on a Friday, we had to massage it this way. Some years it's going to be a whole lot easier. We won't have a whole lot of extra days to move around, but that's discussions that we will have each year, and I don't think we're going to end up writing any sort of generic wording for duck seasons. We'll have a visit every year, I think, on duck seasons. So our recommendation is to do this, where your duck seasons will be these dates. You'll note here the one required federal framework change that we have to make is decreasing the bag limit of pintails. Decreasing it from 2 to 1. So need to make you aware of that. And of course, once it doesn't affect our youth waterfowl hunting days at all. These are the typical dates we might normally have them. The only difference is that the regular season is going to end on January 31st, but then the youth day is on February 1st, the very next day. And then of course the following Saturday. So these are still for the first 2 Saturdays in February. And I think we're going to need to keep them that way because federal frameworks say that we cannot have our youth days any later than 14 days past the latest day that you can hunt. So I don't have the wording of that exact, but basically if February 15th is a Saturday, that's 1 day too many away from the close of the season or the close of the framework. So we can't have a youth day then. And they require us to have them on days that kids aren't in school and things like that. So we're still going to need to stick with these 2 days. Remember last year we came in and we did a lot of work getting our goose seasons, adjusting those so that they would mirror our duck seasons. And so basically all of the changes that you're going to see from here on out are just calendar changes for goose seasons that mirror the changes that we're recommending for duck season, just so that they align. And again, these are just calendar dates. You're looking at For white-fronted geese, phase 1 and phase 2, these are mirroring phase 1 and phase 2 of the duck season. And for Canada goose and brant, phase 3 and phase 4 are the changes that mirror the duck season changes. And then the same with light goose. Phase 3 and phase 4 are the changes. Light goose conservation is affected a little bit in that we had to based on the changes that we had to make with the other goose seasons, it shifted this a few days earlier. So again, just calendar dates on the light goose conservation season. Again, remember, this is the one where folks can use an unplugged shotgun, electronic calls, and with our sandhill crane season, again, we had to do some shifting because our crane season has always mirrored phase 2 of our duck season. And so this is just calendar date changes to mirror what our duck season changes recommendations are. Again, we're still looking to issue 3 tags for folks that draw tags in the southeast crane zone. And then when we issue tags, the statewide tags through the computer method, they're going to get 2 tags per person. And I guess that's all I had.
Thank you, Jamie.
I thought I had another one, but it doesn't seem to be here. Yeah, I got a whole bunch that aren't showing up here.
That may be a sign.
I don't know why. Here we go. Yeah. So, thank you. Yeah. So Raptor seasons, which I know clearly, obviously, that's why you're all here, is to talk about this. But we did, again, these are housekeeping, just simply housekeeping changes, mainly on the crow. The changes we're recommending for crow season, we had to make these housekeeping changes for hunting with raptors on the crow seasons. Everything else, nothing has changed for the other species. Except for, let me back up, I'm sorry, for the duck mergansers and coots, we did have to make an adjustment there based on the changes that we're recommending for the regular duck season. Okay, so these are merely housekeeping calendar dates. And then, so just in summary, the recommended changes that I'm previewing for you today reflect stakeholder input and staff discussion. We want to split the woodcock season to add days in January. We want to split the crow season to add more days in the cooler months. We have changes to the duck season based on anticipated framework dates of being able to end our season on the 31st. Then we have a decrease in the pintail bag limit. And we did some just housekeeping changes for geese, cranes, and hunting with raptors. So with that, I will be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yep.
I want to remind everybody that we're not voting today. This is a preview only. I am going to open it up, though, sorry, with Mr. Chairman, to the whole commission for questions, since this is the preview of a season. So, Commissioner Streb?
Got a question. Why do we hunt crows on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and not the whole week?
Well, so we're limited with the number of days that we can have throughout the year. So the framework is we can only have a maximum of 124 days. And doing it on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday just helps us stretch out the length of time where people can shoot crows across the calendar. Yeah.
Okay. Chairman Cook?
Jamie, first I want to thank you and Joe and the entire staff for all you've done working with the Mississippi Flyway Council. And
Thank
I know
you.
you've worked at this for years, and thank you so much for
Thank you.
just keep beating the drum and working on this. So, and I absolutely agree with everything you're proposing, especially for the ducks. And I think it to hit the main points. Most of the hunters wanted to finish on the 31st, so you got that. Most wanted to have phase 1 start on Saturday, so you got that. And I love the idea of the Friday hunt, as you mentioned, on Thanksgiving. You have families together, folks out of town might want to hunt, and the best part of all, you're really sort of hitting the times that you can harvest ducks. You know, you got the early ducks around Thanksgiving. Some folks were concerned too about losing a weekend. Well, that Friday is sort of like a weekend. Folks are off, so you really only lost half a day here and there, and sometimes you don't miss it. But so the early ducks are around Thanksgiving, and then you know the later you can go in the season tends to be more ducks, and that early December tends to not have much. So what you lose in there is really usually not that significant. But my question is there a reason why we can't just sort of say, have it established as it ends the 31st, and then you back up to the first Saturday well, the Saturday that makes phase one open on Saturday, whatever day that is, always have the Friday, Saturday, Sunday of Thanksgiving, and whatever days are left, just add on to that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It just depends on how Thanksgiving falls. But isn't that the only thing that's going to vary?
Yeah, potentially. And with us getting the survey out as late as we did, it really didn't give me a whole lot of time to play with all of those. Hey, how can we write this in a way that will be generic so that we can figure it out, and just maybe sort of we don't have to address it every year. I would say that is something that I definitely plan on working on to get some really good language. I've got to run it through our legal folks and our law enforcement to make sure that it says that it's not overly complex, that everybody can understand the way we write it. So that is going to take some time. That's actually a pretty big effort. I was just jammed with the amount of time based on when we got the survey out, when we found these things out and moved things along. So point taken, and probably yes, and it's something I'll work on. We think just for the sake of efficiency at this point, it was just easier for us to put the dates in rather than make that generic wording, but I'm certainly going to take a look at it, and so hopefully next year we might be able to have that.
Just to say again, I'm thrilled. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Cox?
Yeah, Jamie, I've got two questions.
Yes, sir.
The real foot season, where's real foot gonna give up the next 2 days? Are they going that Monday and Tuesday, they're not gonna be able to hunt?
Yeah, so I can go back to that slide. They're going to do the exact same thing. They're just going to, they're going to get that Monday and Tuesday after their Saturday, their normal Saturday and Sunday.
All right, next question. Do you have any updated harvest information on sandhill cranes other than the southeast region?
At this point, all I have is that that we've harvested. We've had 276 cranes checked in through our online checking system. I haven't had a chance to separate out what zones each were hunted in or taken in, or if statewide were taken in the crane zone. But at this point, I can tell you that the crane harvest is really low at this point. I think we were at about 600 at this point last year, and we're only at not quite even 300 yet. So, I wish I had those at this point, but I just don't. Certainly by this meeting in February, I'll have those numbers. I'll be able to report those back to you at the February meeting.
Commissioner Swan?
Excuse me, Jamie. Do you know when we will have the number of permits that will be allowable for the cranes?
Yeah, I already have that, and I was anticipating that question from either you or Commissioner Sanders. And let me take a look so I don't get it wrong. It is, I think it's 2,959 is what we are allotted for next year.
How does that compare with last year?
That is up about 300. Yep. But I anticipate, I hate to break this to you, I anticipate next year it's probably going to go down based on our winter so the allotment that we get is based on our 5-year average of our midwinter survey count for cranes, and that number is starting to dip down a little bit. So I think 2959, what we're getting this coming year, is probably going to be a high for the next couple of years, and we'll probably dip down a few, but then we should come back up as we get, just based on the number of cranes we get here in the winter.
Where do you anticipate the additional permits to go? Southeast zone or general?
So last year we had agreed upon, internally staff decided that our split was going to be 60-40. So 60% of those would go to the crane zone, and the other 40% would go statewide. And so those numbers are, I did write that down. So so the allotment would be next year, 1,776 tags would go to the crane zone, and so at 3 per hunter, that would be 592 people could get 3 tags, and for statewide at 2 per person, that would be 591 people.
So that'll actually be less for the southeast then, because we've traditionally been having 1,200, haven't we?
Well, that's 1,200 tags, but so 400 people. You're getting 1,776 tags for 592 people. Yep.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Jamie, for the presentation. I appreciate it. I just had one quick question and another more complicated one. When you say the percentage of duck hunters, and you said that 25% of duck hunters had responded, what data do you use to derive the number of duck hunters since we don't have a duck stand?
Well, so those numbers are derived from the migratory bird permit that all duck hunters are supposed to are required to get, and so those are estimated based on those.
So
So
it reports waterfowl harvest, I guess.
correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one is the youth days. So this year, you'll roll right off of regular season under this proposal, and the very next day would be a youth hunt. All right, so I just want to find out what the basis was for the original change. We used to do the youth hunt was Saturday, Sunday together on one weekend.
That was quite a while ago that we did that. Yeah.
And then many states do that, but I was wondering what the thought process was. I mean, I understand that it spreads it out for local kids, but kids that travel to go hunting probably makes it a little more difficult for them to hunt both those days. And I was wondering, like in this instance where it's really close, if you're doing really well on ducks, maybe it's a great thing. If you're not, and you can rest your area, maybe not so great. So I was just wondering what the background was.
And I think it's exactly what you just said, is that you could have, if that first weekend you went and it wasn't great, chances are the next day it's not going to be great, but they would give you another week that maybe fresh birds would come in and that the kids would have the opportunity to get some good hunts on some fresh birds. There's also that thought of, if you hunt one area, if you hunt on Saturday, certainly the next day when you hunt it, it's not going to be as good. So if you were to give a week worth of rest on a particular area, that your hunting would be probably just as good the next week. And so it was really about thinking about can we provide good quality hunt for the kids on those days. Certainly it's all over the board as far as what we can do, why we do, why we don't. But at this point, that is my understanding. That's why we set it up this way, and that's why we've been maintaining it this way, with splitting those 2 days between the two Saturdays.
Okay, thanks a lot, and I appreciate the January 31st, much like Chairman Cook, and want to try to get drawn for that sandhill.
Yeah, you and me both.
Commissioner Sanders.
Oh, please don't bring that up. He's still mad at me about that.
He's not the only one, is all I'm saying.
I will remind Commissioner Sanders that Kirk Miles was the person who drew your name, and I was the one who actually read it. So really, if you really want to throw stones, yeah. Oh, you're welcome, Kirk.
I contend you could have easily said John Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a follow-up. Jamie, you may have covered it, or I misunderstood. Why would you not wait after the close of the season and have the youth hunt on the 8th and the 15th?
Well, because the federal framework for youth days says that we can't set youth days any later than 14 days after the framework date closing. So if we close on the 31st, the latest that we could have a youth hunt day would be February 14th. And so if you look at the calendar, February 15th would be the next following Saturday. That's 1 day too late outside of the frameworks. And the frameworks also say you have to put them on days when kids are not in school, and there's a few other things. So like we couldn't put it during the week. We kind of have to put it on the weekends or a holiday.
Do you think that might change if when this 31st end date goes into effect?
Well, that's a good question, and certainly it's not something that we had talked about at the flyway level, but I think maybe as folks are trying to put this in play with the January 31st closing day and really seeing how it might affect their youth seasons, we might have that discussion. I would say for this year, I don't know. But I'd be willing to bet we're going to talk about it at the Flyway meeting in February.
Commissioner Sanders?
Jamie, you said, you talked about the 60-40 split.
Yes, sir.
Have you already decided to continue with that, or are you going to wait till you see the data this year based on the hunts and all the data?
Yeah, I think what we had agreed upon last year is that we would wait for the numbers this year. We kind of wanted to keep it at 60-40 for the next couple of years to sort of get some consistent, if we didn't change things a whole lot, then we could really understand what the numbers say for the next few years. But I wouldn't say that we are completely beholden to the 60-40 depending on how numbers start showing up. So, but I think that is how I think we planned on proceeding, at least at first. So.
Well, as the Crane Zone Commissioner, I'm not necessarily wanting to go that way, but I understand. Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner McLaren?
Just for clarification of the dates on the screen, should that be February 1st, 2020?
Yes, they should. Yep.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Comments? All right. Thank you, Jamie.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Next, I'm going to try to pronounce Dave's last name. We all know him as D.U. Dave, but Mr. Dave Kostersky.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invite, Vice Chairman, Chairman, Director Carter. Every year, I've been coming to this commission and giving a little update. I'll try to keep it brief, but certainly I'll start off with how much we appreciate the long-term partnership we've had with TWRA and the commission itself. Our conservation work that we pull off together is tremendous for the waterfowl resource and really contributes to the continental conservation of waterfowl. Our success in Canada could not have been achieved over the past 80 years without partnerships across the U.S. Many states started supporting conservation work on the breeding grounds as early as the 1940s through major gift donations. States themselves started in 1965. And Tennessee followed not long behind in the 1970s. I always like to throw this graphic up. It's either this one or the band return graphic that I typically do. And this one just reminds you, and all the folks that maybe are new to this topic, how important the breeding grounds are onto your annual recruitment, that population that comes south every year. That population that comes south is dependent primarily on the production of waterfowl and the survival of the birds when they're on the breeding grounds, because the hens are most susceptible when they're in their nesting period. And so it's that activity on the breeding grounds that's so critical to your annual populations. I had a discussion briefly with Commissioner Cox before the meeting about what's the role of harvest versus recruitment of waterfowl in annual populations. We know they both contribute to that, but we know primarily it is this recruitment side that is the big player in whether or not the populations are going up and down in waterfowl numbers in the continent. And one of our primary challenges is this idea of losing habitat. We would love to be able to say, you know what, we've got enough habitat in Prairie Canada that if we just get water on a regular basis or on a normal cycle, we would have enough waterfowl forever. But we're not in that position, unfortunately, due to the challenges on the landscape in the prairie pothole region of Canada and the U.S. We have to work in an active landscape where conservation and agriculture primarily are at odds at some places, whether it's wetlands on the landscape or grasslands or commodity prices and challenges for agriculture to make a living on that landscape. And so it's about working together on this working landscape, not unlike what Scott talked about, the rice. We're talking about a landscape where the partnerships have to occur primarily on private land in order to achieve success for conservation of this migratory suite of species that move. So our partnership with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency is really, and I was talking to Jamie about this a little while ago, and it was about A lot of folks view this as a contribution. We're going to give money to do this conservation work, and I really refer to it as a contract. So in this past year, TWRA contracted Ducks Unlimited, because you guys don't have staff running around up in Prairie, Canada. So you contract Ducks Unlimited to go do conservation work on your behalf on the breeding grounds to ensure that there's habitat there for this species that just don't happen to primarily breed here in the state. So by that, you put forward $166,000 from your state, important dollars that you guys could use for a lot of different things, including the challenges you see with CWD right now. But you put that forward and we match it. Ducks Unlimited has agreed to from the beginning of this program, when states said they would step up at the beginning of NACA, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. Gary Myers was one of those directors that came to the Ducks Unlimited and said, if we get money from the states, will you match it? And DU said we will. And from that day on, DU has matched every state dollar that goes up to Canada. And then we use that to go access NACA, which is the U.S. federal source. And then above that, obviously, we add Canadian dollars on our side, but there's a nice little bonus in there right now, about $200,000 on that. That's called an exchange. Your dollar is much stronger than ours. So when I turn that U.S. into Canadian, it turns into over $800,000 Canadian. And that's a huge impact on the landscape. You're talking about $160,000. Normally you could buy a quarter section of the land with that, to $860,000. Now you can make a bigger difference. What did we achieve with those dollars for this past year? Well, we were able to purchase 310 acres, put easements, perpetual conservation easements on 925 acres. Conservation agreements, which is 10, 20, 30-year agreements on either wetlands or on restoring grassland areas or protecting areas through leases on 902 acres. We planted a new 483 acres of grasslands on private lands. The planted nesting cover, that's on the lands that we own. So that's another 222 acres that we were able to seed and bring into grass for as long as we own the land, which is in perpetuity. And then last thing, stewardship. That's when I talk about, and the folks around this room have probably heard, or at least some of you heard about winter wheat, some of those stewardship things, working with cattle, the industries where they have large grazing pastures. Well, working with that's called stewardship. And so how we do that is we partner with those folks by providing information, incentives, encouragements to do these activities on the landscape that are beneficial to waterfowl and conservation. A lot of folks, numbers don't mean a lot to them, so I like to throw in a few pictures of just actual pieces of land that we've impacted in the past year, and I just have 3 to flip through. Donison land purchase. We bought this half section of land. You can see it was primarily cultivated. We were able to seed all that cultivated land to nesting grass. It affected a total of 315 acres. This is the sketch plan. We delineate all the wetlands. The 2 small red wetlands in there we were able to restore. So we put in a small earthen plug. And for those that saw this on the ground up in Canada, it's a pretty simple process. You get a small cat, you push some dirt in the ditch, and you got a wetland back. It's that simple. Getting those wetlands back are critical because they are the carrying capacity for waterfowl on the breeding grounds. Another one, this one that was more intact. It was already in grass. There were some areas that had been cultivated, but they've been planted back to grass. This one here, we just wanted to protect it. So we approached the landowner and we provided a perpetual conservation easement. Up there, we don't do donated easements because there's not a lot of interest. So we do a paid easement. Average paid easement runs between $200 and $300 an acre. And so this landowner got between $200 and $300 an acre to protect all the wetlands and all the grasslands on that half section in perpetuity forever. That was the Rutledge 3 conservation easement. When we say Rutledge 3, that's the 3rd one we've done with this family. And then patron land purchase. Here's just a sweet piece of habitat. It's right next door. The quarter to the bottom of it we already own. It's one adjacent, so we bought the next one. If you look kitty corner to the right, we own that one. So what we try to do is block habitat. And this one came up for sale. You can see it's extremely wet. High waterfowl habitat, high wetland density is really valuable to waterfowl. And we bought that one. It was already in grass, so we were able to just protect it as it is. It looks gorgeous. This is just a graphic to give you that waterfowl feel for what the dollars do. Here's the Tennessee investment. That's that first dollar that's so critical. You add that U.S. match, DU match. You had some Canadian match. You had some NACA. I mean, that's the difference of doing conservation work together, is we make more ducks together because we can leverage the dollars, and it makes a difference. Roughly a 4-to-1 ratio in Canada. On a broader perspective, you are not the only state agency participating in this program. You're one of 41 states. We're at a record. This is the graph that tracks since the early 1980s, state participation and dollars, cumulative annual dollars over that time period. As you can see, we're at a record number of states at 41 states, and just down from a record in total dollars last year. This year we're projecting by the end of this fiscal year to be at a record number of dollars in partnerships with state agencies. It's a tremendous, tremendous effort. One thing that doesn't show on this is the AWFA goal. So that goal for each state, that goal adds up to 10 million collectively. So we're at pushing on 4 million out of 10 million that we're trying to get to. It's been a long goal. We've been growing. Still have those aspirations of getting to that $10 million goal. And thanks to Tennessee Wildlife Resources agencies, and you're stepping up, you are at your AWFA goal at 166,000. You're doing your part. Within the Mississippi Flyway, states collectively are at about 50% of the AWFA goal together. That means some states are below their goal, others are above their goal, and others are at. Illinois, who hasn't been able to send for a while, has now got new legislation in place, and they're going to get back and above their goal, which is a tremendous story. Louisiana has a very large goal. They've never got there. They have about $1 million as their AWFA goal because they kill a lot of ducks, usually. But this just gives you the perspective of just where we're trying to get and the success of the program. And thanks to your state agency, your leadership, you guys are doing your part in helping get to this conservation goal continentally. Wanted to give you the quick picture of conditions up in Canada. This doesn't look good right now. Thankfully, we get some of our most critical moisture for spring runoff in March, we typically get, but where we're sitting right now is very little. We were dry going into the fall. This is a 90-day time period, so this is going back into kind of middle of October, from October till now. So our precipitation in the fall was quite low. It was very dry in August, got a little bit in September, but not enough to make a measurable difference. So soil moisture is way down. It would take a substantial snowfall to really provide enough water in the water table if we get a slow melt to really bring wetlands back. So we're sitting on another year where if we're going to have decent conditions, it will likely come in rainfall events in spring. And we've been in that situation for probably the last 4 years at least, where winter hasn't looked great, the fall hasn't looked great, but we've been pulled out of that drought by spring rains. And if we don't get that one of these years, we are going to be very dry. We're just sitting on the edge of seeing a pretty dry landscape if we don't get significant spring rains again this year. And then the last thing I want to say is I always extend an invitation for state partners to come see what we do on the breeding grounds. Seeing conservation firsthand, what your dollars do on the ground, the difference it makes, interacting, getting to talk to. I'm the guy that gets to come down here and talk on behalf of DU Canada, but my preference is for you folks to get the opportunity to ask the staff on the ground what it is that we do, which landowners, how we work on the landscape, ask them the challenging questions about, well, why does it cost this much an acre to do this? Or why did you buy that piece of habitat when we're on the ground? I think it's critical for folks to see it firsthand. Sometimes I call it your tour of duty. It's your duty to see where your dollars go and what they do on the ground. And I once again put that invite out to the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and the Commission to come up to the breeding grounds in Saskatchewan where your dollars are directed and come see firsthand what your conservation dollars do to make a difference. With that, I just want to say thank you once again for your partnership, for your continued support of conservation, for your leadership, and Ed and Gary before him. You guys are a critical, valued organization. I'll say one last thing. What you do in supporting Ed as the current president of AWFA is tremendous. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is a critical organization, and to have a commission of this size and this depth give that kind of support to their directors is absolutely essential for them to be able to do what they can do for us all together. Because that organization just doesn't talk about what's going on in the U.S. It's an international organization. It includes the Canadian provinces, has directors from the provinces on there as well. So it makes a difference in what we do up in Canada as well. Thank you for what you do there.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody got any questions for Dave? Mr. Sanders?
One real quick, and it may just,
Yes, sir.
I don't know. What is our goal based on? Because you kind of threw me off with the Louisiana comment, so I just want to make sure I understand.
Absolutely. So the goal was set at $10 million, and it was established based on the conservation need for waterfowl conservation and to match NACA, so the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. So that $10 million goal was applied to 48 states. We don't include Alaska or Hawaii for pretty obvious reasons, I think. So in that, then they use your harvest and your waterfowl hunter numbers to divvy up between the states what your share of that goal is. And so that's where that goal comes from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Dave, for the presentation. Appreciate it. One part of it you had where you were showing us the different tracts of land you purchased.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I noticed was you listed grasslands and nesting cover separately. Can you tell me?
Sure.
Explain what the difference is, one versus the other, because I just don't understand it, I guess.
That's all right. So when I'm separating those two out, when I was talking about grasslands, that's primarily our programs where we provide an incentive to a landowner to convert cultivated land to forage, pasture, whatever it might be. So that's what I categorize under our grasslands. So that's the idea of getting a cultivated acre converted. The planted nesting cover is lands that we own that we're converting from cultivation to nest and cover. And so we manage that differently than, say, a landowner. He's going to hay his every year. He's going to graze it every year. Land that we buy and we put in grass, we're going to manage it for optimal waterfowl return on investment. So we might only manage it once every 3 years, 4 years, whatever's the best to keep it in the healthiest condition to raise the most ducks. Because when it comes to DU and us, we're waterfowl first. We are a waterfowl organization. We do tons of things that benefit other songbirds, deer, all the different birds. I mean, we got bears on some of our land. But what our number one mandate is waterfowl, whereas the landowner, their number one mandate is forage for their operation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, appreciate it.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dave, and I look forward to the opportunity for these commissioners that have not been and seen the breeding grounds and 5 new ones that we have coming on in March for the opportunity. It really was an eye-opener. I've heard all my life as a young man, why send all this money to Canada? Why? But after you go and see that we wouldn't have anything here as far as ducks if it wasn't for what happened in Canada. And I just want to say I appreciate what you do and all of what DU Canada does. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take just a quick break. We've got to be back in here by 2:30, so we're going to start sharp at 2:30. So, thank you. Yeah. Dr. Hatcher's calling in for his part of the meeting, so that's why.
Yeah, right. I appreciate that too. Hey, let's not.
You're not on Facebook.
No, but I can go to there are people.
How do we get live streaming? YouTube? Yeah, send it to, you want email it? Give him your email. He's got a link, he wants to hear the CWD. Yep. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, please do. I don't have a Facebook. WCOX.
How are you?
At duncandonuts.com.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, how you doing? This is spectacular.
How's it going?
Appreciate it.
have a hot mic, something might be said we don't want out. You bet. I told you. Just can't talk about anything.
That's what I looked, when he said that, I looked over there and made sure that was all the way down.
Perfect. Okay. How are you? Good, how are you? Oh, yeah.
The second half and I saved it, but sometimes, you know, before they eat food, they will I'll do that later. Well, let me ask you now, I saved something
right, if I can get everybody's attention, we'll get back started. Dr. Hatcher on the phone.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm gonna introduce two people, as I'm not exactly sure how this is gonna go, but first we've got Chuck Yoest, who is our CWD coordinator, and on the phone we've got Dr. Charlie Hatcher, who is currently our state veterinarian, and by the first of next week will be our Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Tennessee. So, Chuck, I'll turn it over to you and let you navigate it.
Thank you. So now we'll begin the CWD portion of the meeting. And first off is Dr. Hatcher, who I believe we have on the line, and we should be able to hear him. Dr. Hatcher, if you'll go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, first, my apologies for not getting on sooner. My meeting that I'm at went a little longer than I thought. But I would like to say that as I transition from state veterinarian to commissioner, Dr. Douglas Ballphaser, or Dr. Doug Ballphaser, will be the interim state veterinarian, and he's already stepped in as co-incident commander of the incident command team, and that's already in place. But I would pledge to the commission and to the agency that you're going to have the full support of the Department of Agriculture, Tennessee Department of Agriculture, for this response efforts moving forward, and it's our intention to try to protect the captive herd industry the best we possibly can. And I do plan on monitoring that even after Saturday, and my intention is to be at least a portion of the time at many of the commission meetings that I can possibly attend, or as many as I can attend. I think it's important to continue a good relationship with the agency on a number of fronts, and this CWD response right now is a big deal to hunters, I know, and also to captive service owners. So we're in this together, and we will continue to support those efforts. And that's pretty much all I have, Chuck.
All right, well, feel free to hang around to hear the rest of the presentations, but thanks for joining us.
Let me ask if anybody's got any questions for him, if that's all right.
Sure.
Just in case he gets cut off. Has anybody got any questions for Dr. Hatcher while we've got him on the line?
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Dr. Hatcher, when you say protect the deer farmers, or not deer farmers, but the elk farmers, whatever, what does that mean to you? I mean, is that double fencing, what does that mean?
No, what I'm referring to is protect. Is we know we have CWD in the wild deer in the southwest part of Tennessee, especially those two counties. And so, and it's going to be the effort. All our efforts should be focused at keeping it there, because we know CWD is forever. So that's what I mean by protect is prevent the spread, if possible. But being that said, that's the reason we want to have reporting of existing captive herd owners, and we want to increase sampling efforts because we don't have enough samples to know whether we have it in captive herds or not. But we hope and pray that we don't at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gardner?
Yes, sir. Dr. Hatcher, is it mandatory that they have the animal tested, that any animal that die in a captive herd, is that mandatory, and are y'all considering that if it's not?
Well, that's part of the emergency rule, is they make it available for testing, just like they have always had to do for hunting preserves. So the rule says that they make it available for TWRA and for TDA for testing. So the intention is, yes, it's mandatory for them to report that to us and make it available, assuming they're aware of it. I mean, sometimes it may be on a 3,000-acre place, and they may not be aware of it till it's too late to test. But yes.
That brings up an interesting point. So if the deer has been laying out there for an extended period of time, is there no way to test that at that point, since you said that?
I think there is a point where it's too necrotic or too dead, the tissue is to test, is my understanding. I don't know. It depends on the weather conditions. That, you know, if it's wintertime, that's a long time, or if it's below freezing or near freezing, that's a lot different than middle of the summer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Hatcher. Go ahead, Chuck.
All right. Thank you. And I'll invite Dr. Dan Grove up, University of Tennessee Extension Wildlife Veterinarian, who we have partnered with the University of Tennessee for his support. And he has been a crucial part of our response thus far, and I'm really grateful to him because he's almost worth every penny. So I'll gladly defer to him at this point.
Thank you, Chuck. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, thank you for allowing me some time here to talk to you guys today. Most of what I'm going to cover, I hope, is a review. And I'm just going to, it's a lot of the same information we presented at the Ballover meetings, but at least just kind of give a good overview and then maybe hit some more questions a little bit harder that we've been getting from the general public, as well as just hunters in general. So. Basically, what is chronic wasting disease? It's a TSE. It's caused by a prion, which is a misfolded protein that normally exists in the body, but for whatever reason it's become infectious, and then the body can't get rid of it and actually ultimately leads to cell death. There's other prion diseases, BSE or mad cow disease, scrapie of sheep and goats, and then obviously the human version, which is CJD, which is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Key thing to note is that once this cycle starts, basically within the cells, it will ultimately lead to the death of the cells. It causes a spongiform appearance whenever you look at it under a microscope, and that's why it's called a spongiform encephalopathy. Basically, in terms of where it's at in the body, it's pretty much been found everywhere in the body. Initially, back whenever it was first identified, primarily the test could detect it in the brain and spinal cord, and that's still where the highest concentrations are, but there's all kinds of different places in the body that it's been identified at this point in time, and you can kind of see by the picture, it's pretty much everywhere. So it's part of the reason why there's carcass export and import ban that's in place, as well as the types of tissues that we can actually look at to identify for testing. Some of the signs of CWD, it's kind of a nondescript term, chronic wasting disease really is, because there's a lot of other diseases that can actually cause the same clinical signs. But in the later stages of the disease, if they became infected today, it would take about 10 to 18 months before we actually saw clinical signs. And about from in between month 1 to month 4 post-infection is when we can actually start to detect it, and they're also starting to shed it at that point in time. But when they actually become clinical, which means we can actually identify that there might be something wrong with the animal, we'll start to see a thinner animal, poor hair coat. Later stages of the disease, they might start circling. Other things that we might actually see is they're standing there drooling, they're urinating, defecating on themselves, and then ultimately it leads to death. And it is 100% fatal. It's a slowly progressive disease, like I mentioned. On average, it's 10 to 18 months for the course of the disease, but it could go upwards of 24 to 36 months, depending on the particular individual that's infected. There is no known treatment. There's been a lot of work with vaccines, and the most recent vaccine study that was actually done in elk made the animals 4 to 7 times more likely to get the disease as a result of being vaccinated, which is kind of the opposite of what you want with a vaccine. Like I mentioned before, it is one you don't ever get it. Resistance is you'll get it, you're still going to die from it. It's just, it takes you longer to develop clinical disease, which is actually in the long run, at the point at which when actually a fawn might become infected, it's kind of negligible because if you look at the way the birthing process actually occurs, the doe usually cleans up the fawn by licking it and cleaning it. And so since it's present in saliva, in the urine and feces, those are all methods that the fawn could be infected on day 1. This is why environmental contamination and things like that become more and more important. We have put rules in place to kind of prevent unnatural congregations of animals. We can't prevent the natural congregation on the landscape, but bait sites, feed sites, rubs and scrapes, mineral licks, natural and artificial, have all been shown to be areas where prions are deposited in the environment and have higher concentrations and act as a place of continual infection for animals. Needless to say, as an animal, if they continue to frequent that after becoming infected, they're adding more prions to that site if they keep coming back to that site, which then potentially infects even more animals. Studies at this point in time indicate that there's some level of permanency of the disease. So far, the studies are looking at 15 plus years where you put an animal into an environment that's known to have had CWD present, and the animals are still being infected in the environment after that. Obviously, once again you get an infected animal in that kind of a scenario, they're adding more prions themselves, which then just perpetuates the cycle. We do know that there are some soil types that actually play a role in basically maintaining the disease in the environment, and there's some soil types that actually make the disease more infectious to animals. Our primary susceptible species that we're looking at here in the state of Tennessee is going to be white-tailed deer and elk. I've listed the other species in the United States, mule deer and moose, potentially black-tailed deer. There's not been natural infection of black-tail at this point in time, but experimentally they are able to get it. It is not known to be infectious to cattle, sheep, horses, or goats. There's been a lot of work done with that on the livestock side of things. As you can tell, we're not alone. There's been 26 states that have identified the disease, and at this point in time, 3 Canadian provinces that have identified the disease. One of the biggest questions we get, is it safe to eat an animal infected with CWD? There's been actually several conflicting studies. One of the ones it has yet to go under peer review. There are some indicators that it potentially is infectious to people, but it's using an animal proximate model, meaning that there's using macaques. And so the key thing to remember is there's been no known cases of human infection with CWD. It's existed in the wild population since 1967. Right now, if you look at the Wisconsin core area, they're almost approaching 50% prevalence in adult males and 35 to 40% prevalence in adult females. And there's not been a documented case humans getting prions, because there are that we look to for, and they don't recommend consuming meat from a known infected animal. So what are we starting to see in other states? Out west and in Wisconsin, they're actually starting to see a shift in age structure. They're not seeing any more of the older class animals, and so the average age has shifted from 4.5 to 6 years of age downwards of 2.5 to 4.5 years of age. You're not seeing your older class bucks, and you're not seeing older does. Does, in some research, it's shown that they may only end up having one fawn or twins the first year before they succumb to the disease. So if they are themselves infected as a fawn, they're probably going to die of that disease by the time that they're 18 months of age, which only gives them one reproductive cycle. And then their fawns are likely to get infected, and so it just kind of drives the age structure down. And then fawns that are born to does that have CWD, they're less likely to actually survive, because that doe is more likely to either die that year before the fawn is able to survive on its own, or it's more likely to actually be harvested during that season. And there's some good work that shows that animals that are actually CWD infected are actually more predisposed to being harvested. There are population declines in some areas up to 40%. And that's areas where the disease has existed for 20 plus or years. Right now, there's not been any sign of recovery. If you look in that image, that's actually a sample of the lymph node that we're collecting. We're using the retropharyngeal lymph nodes to actually test in these animals. Last fall, we instituted a new enhanced weight-based surveillance system. And basically what that was, Dr. Schuler gave a great presentation on that. I believe it was in the September meeting. And I'll just briefly touch on it here. We looked at each county and assessed a risk value for that county of potentially either already having the disease or the disease coming into that county because it was bordering an adjacent state with CWD. And there was points assigned to animals based on that risk. And so there were county level goals that were set. Chuck will actually have a slide showing with those goals and where we are with those goals for the year. What I can tell you, there's only about 3 counties that we have not reached those surveillance goals. There's a lot of counties where we're actually above our surveillance goals. There's only one county in Region 1, which is Lake County up in the northwest, that we've not reached that, and the other 2 counties actually fall in Region 3 and Region 4. In December of 2018, as we're all aware, we got our notification of our first detections in Hardeman and Fayette counties. At this point in time, that's still the only place that we've actually seen the disease. As you're aware, we passed new regulations and increase our sampling efforts. So this is where we stand right now as of this morning. I want you guys to keep in mind that this is changing daily because we're getting reports back from the lab daily now. We're sitting at 32 positives in Fayette and 31 positives in Hardeman, no detections in McNary. We've got a total of about 1,600 plus samples just from those 3 counties alone. Statewide, we're looking at about 4,300. I'm just giving you rough estimates. And we're still got about 850 samples that are still pending. And so this number is going to grow more than likely, as well as the distribution on the landscape has the potential to grow at this point in time. So this is where our distribution looks like as of this morning. There are still a handful of hunters that have not been contacted from this last batch because we just got some more last night. And so, like I said, this is kind of trying to hit a moving target at this point in time. So what this gives us is that gives us an idea of where our 5-mile buffer is the red line and the purple lines are our 10-mile buffers, and it kind of gives you an idea of where that distribution and zones are at this point in time. So with that, I know it was a quick brief overview. We didn't want to waste too much time covering some of this material, but I would open up at this point in time if there are any questions from the commission.
Well, Commissioner Swan, Dr. Grove, I'm going to hold all questions till we get done. That's all right.
Yep, that's fair enough.
Okay. Chuck may cover something next that'll answer a question, so I'll let you go through it all.
Thank you, Dr. Grove. Don't go too far, please. So now I will describe the agency response thus far. And before I do, I'm very happy to say that even though this is kind of a tragic circumstance that we're experiencing here, I'm really happy and thankful for the agency's response thus far. It's been quite an effort. You may have noticed that Dan and I, or Dr. Grove and I, have more gray hair than the last time we saw you. So, and that applies to a lot of other staff as well. So we're grateful for that effort and thankful for the commission's support and partners, and the list goes on and on. So I'll share about the response now, and some of this will be a review for the commissioners that we were lucky enough to have at our recent public meeting in Bolivar. So over the next few minutes, I'll share with you some of our pre-CWD efforts, bring everybody up to speed on the activation of our response plan, the establishment of our management zones, and the associated regulations, other management actions that have taken, or that the agency and the commission have taken. And as a caveat to this presentation, I wanted to say that not everybody is as aware as we would like for everybody to be on the results that we currently have. It's been quite the balance trying to notify people appropriately, but yet come today with the most or with the latest information so that you all have the latest. And we've accomplished that, but in doing so, we haven't been able to be as prompt in notifying all stakeholders as we would like to. But with that, I'll remind you what Dr. Grove touched on a moment ago about our statewide surveillance efforts that are risk-based, and this was done mostly through staff out collecting samples like you see pictured here, and then working with processors and taxidermists who are part of a program where they secure those samples for us. Through those efforts, you'll see a state map here with the counties designated and a score assigned to them that represents a goal that we had for each county. And if you'll look, the counties that are a pale color or white are counties where we met that goal. The ones that are blue, we came up short. The ones in brown and red, we exceeded our goals. So we set goals for these counties. We were successful in nearly all of them in achieving those goals. And the point is to take a risk-based approach so that if chronic wasting disease does exist in Tennessee, that we're going to find it, and we're going to find it as early as we possibly can. And this was the first year we've taken this approach, and I guess unfortunately have proven just how successful of a technique it is. So along with implementing that surveillance strategy, which continues even still outside of the management zone, we began to stage for a response because it just felt like it was inevitable and about to happen, and a lot of work went into preparing for that, including the development and update of an agency response plan. And that response was to be in partnership with organizations like the Department of Ag, who we heard from a minute ago, the Wildlife Federation, USDA, and other partners. Well, on December 6th, when you guys were having a commission meeting, James Kelly, the deer program leader, and I received a call from Mississippi, and we learned that they had a CWD positive deer about 13 miles from the Tennessee border, which automatically activated the agency's response plan because it was within the 25 miles that was established in that plan. And, you know, that was a humbling call, and then realization that we needed to activate our plan. But I was a little relieved because I referred to it as a CWD response light, or light CWD response, thinking that you know, it wouldn't be such a large experience. Well, that didn't last long, because on December 14th we received the news that we had 10 positives from Hardeman and Fayette County. And immediately the response plan was activated, which involved standing up an incident management team in partnership with the Department of Ag and USDA, and that continues to this day and will throughout this response. And that also, subsequently, a field response effort began at that point. So right away we began contacting hunters who we knew had harvested the deer that came back positive, and began working on learning the location for those. And this is quite a project in itself, just securing this data and being confident in it, and then also responding appropriately. And this is what we refer to as a heat map that shows each spot basically represents a positive sample. And in the cases where there's a different color, like for example a yellow, that indicates multiple deer testing positive from that property. So then, because of the location of those and the fact that we had established a high risk 10-mile radius, we had established that radius in our response plan, and that any counties within a 10-mile radius of those positives would be included in a CWD response, which brought us to Fayette, Hardeman, and McNairy counties. Well, along with that became the need to make sure that stakeholders were aware of this occurrence, and then to get even more serious about sampling in those counties to determine prevalence and spatial distribution of the disease there. And that's something that you're going to probably get tired of hearing from us, is those words, prevalence and spatial distribution, because that's where we're focused now, or one of the major areas of focus is to figure out what that is, and then make recommendations based on what we learn. And so our sampling that we had already been doing was then enhanced by the development of a sampling drop-off station program for hunters to drop off deer heads, for them to be able to get disease results for the deer that they likely plan to consume, and then for for us to better know where the disease is and how much is there so that we can act accordingly. So then the commission, in partnership with the agency, made some regulatory changes. Not much point to drilling down on these much because you guys are well aware of what you did, but it was necessary to establish the management zone with regulations, to create carcass exportation restrictions from these counties, restrict wildlife feeding, and then established a new deer season for these counties to increase harvest and therefore increase the number of samples that we get to better inform our response. And in doing that, also established mandatory physical check stations, and hopefully you all have gotten to see one of these or maybe will over the next couple of weeks. It's a pretty, it's a really extensive effort, and it's pretty impressive that we've been able to accomplish these, and will for a couple more weeks. And it's not mandatory that hunters provide a sample, but it is mandatory that in those 3 counties on the weekends that they bring a deer to these check stations, and we can then secure samples. And then there was a need to do a lot of public outreach, and one of the ways of doing that was to have a public meeting that we had in Bolivar that was a great event for the agency despite the circumstances. And I believe we had over 400 folks there, or stakeholders at that meeting, and the last I heard had over 30,000 views of the video from that meeting. So a really good, so that's really great. This is the latest on the sampling. Dan's already shared these numbers. Mine's presented just a little different, and the highlights is that we've got 63, up to 63 now, and that's as of this morning, and we're getting results daily, so it could change by tomorrow, but that's what we currently have. I'll add that as of this morning, we had collected just shy of 4,400 samples statewide this deer season, which is crazy high compared to the past. I think the highest figure I had ever heard for us in a season was 1,800. So that's a really good fruit of our response. Those are the latest totals from the management zone as you know it. Now, Dan's previewed this map already, but I'll say that, and I'll back up one to say that 52 of the 63, so 52 of the 63 that we're aware of, we have locations for, and this is a map showing those locations. Now, the reason we don't have the remaining ones is we're making those calls as we speak, and that takes a little while to accomplish, and we just found out about some of these yesterday. So, but I'll draw your attention to the furthest west point that is there on the Shelby-Fayette County line. So Shelby County is now in this game because of the proximity of that Fayette County, that farthest west Fayette County sample, which would mean Shelby County is within the high-risk zone of that sample. So we need to focus on Shelby County as well in our response. And I should have advanced to this slide before I made all those statements, but if you look at the furthest west point, again, you'll see that tightest circle from that point. That's the 5-mile radius, which we define as a core zone, and then the purple line outside of that is the 10-mile, which goes well into Shelby County. And I'll remind you that we have a similar circumstance to the east there, where McNairy County, the positive sample, the farthest east actually lies in Hardeman County. However, it's close enough to McNairy County that McNairy County is within the high-risk buffer of that sample or of that location. I'll add here that this is such new information that we're trying to decide exactly what this means. But at this point, my understanding is that per the rule, the emergency rule that was implemented for this CWD response, that this would mean that Shelby County would now be included in the CWD management zone. So we would now be looking at 4 counties. And that along with that, carcass exportation restrictions would apply in Shelby County as they do in the other 3. And then this would also mean an immediate restriction on wildlife feeding. And this is all pending us announcing this on our website. And that's as far as it goes at this point without further action. So knowing all this, we informed you when you took the actions that I just described that the goal is to gather as much information we could, specifically prevalence and spatial distribution. And then once we get all the information that we can glean from the mandatory check stations and the CWD sampling drop-off stations, once we get all that data and understand what the results are, then the goal will be to develop a long-term plan to recommend to stakeholders, including the commission, and then to implement the management actions necessary to try our best to keep this disease where it currently is and decrease the prevalence there, which is going to require decreasing the interactions of deer in this area. And then we're also going to continue our prevention efforts outside of this area, and then continue the risk-based surveillance that we're so confident in now in the non-CWD zones, so that if it were to occur outside of this management zone, that we would detect it early and respond accordingly. So I'll close with a few more comments to say that as I shared at the public meeting, TWRA is fully dedicated to this conservation issue, and we're going to do all that we can do to best manage it. We realize this is a loss to our stakeholders, and we feel that loss. And there's going to be very few people out there that are as passionate or concerned about this issue as agency staff, or wildlife officers, or biologists, or managers. So I just want to say that this is a loss for us as well, and we certainly couldn't be more passionate about the best management of this disease. And we realize that it's going to require partnering with hunters and landowners, and that's going to be our priority. And it will be a long journey, and I'll caution folks that it's going to be quite some time before we see the results that we hope to see. But it's going to be super important for hunters to continue hunting, harvesting, and continuing those hunter traditions, and not letting CWD stop them. And we're not going to let it stop us. And together, the goal is to best manage this disease, but it has to be together.
Thank you, Chuck. I just want to begin before I open it up for questions, but just echoing what I've seen from agency staff, the passion you guys have, it's truly amazing to see the effort that has went into this and what you guys have come together and done in such a short amount of time, especially the public meeting. I texted Director Carter that night. I didn't really have a word to say, but just phenomenal job that you guys did, all the way from law enforcement officers to wildlife staff to fisheries staff was there, even because they were concerned, but on their own time. But they're in uniform. But to see those at least 50 uniformed agency employees there was just a show of what you guys, the intent you have of what you intend to do and how concerned you are about it. I know Director Carter and Assistant Director and you went to check-in stations. I have a feeling it's been a while since a director took the time to go to deer check-in stations. So Director Carter, thank you for the effort that you've given and the leeway that you give to your employees and the confidence that you have in them. But just hats off to all of you. The testing numbers, I've looked at some testing. Missouri had some more positives come back. Got an email yesterday, but the number of sampling they've done compared to what you guys is unprecedented of what you guys have done. And just thank you for the effort from the commission. I hope I speak as a whole. But I'm going to open it up for questions from any of the other commissioners. Dr. Groves, if you want to come on up in case somebody's got one for you. Commissioner Swan.
Dr. Groves, I was at a CWD seminar last Saturday in Reno, and the executive director of the Deer Farmers Association tried to state that there were more deer now in Wisconsin, where they first discovered CWD, and in Colorado than there have ever been. Is that true or false?
Are you referencing population numbers or more positives?
Population numbers.
Wyoming, the 40% prevalence or 40% decline that I mentioned, that's Wyoming.
No, I'm talking about Wisconsin and Colorado.
Oh, Colorado. Well, Colorado has also seen declines. With Wisconsin, they haven't actually increased their numbers necessarily, but if you look at the predictive models for Wisconsin, because of the number of deer that actually exist on the landscape there, and their core zone is anywhere from 50 to 100 deer per square mile, depending on which county you're specifically looking at. In order to actually start seeing a population decline in that level of a population, you have to have your 40 to 50% prevalence rate. And so they're just now getting to that in their wild population. And so in the next 5 years, my guess is that if the predictive models are true, and most of them have actually been true for the other states that have looked at this, they're going to start seeing the decline. Now, one of the key things that they already have seen, and they have well documented, is they're seeing a shift in the age structure. And that is a downward shift in the age structure. And so we already know that this is having an impact on the way that animals are interacting on the landscape. But the problem is whenever you have a very fertile landscape that can hold a lot of deer, you have to have a high rate of infection before it'll drive that population down. Now, you look in your Wyomings and your Colorados where the deer densities are lower, it takes a lot lower level of disease before you actually start seeing that. So basically your prevalence will be lower and a lower density before you actually start seeing that shift in age structure and population decline.
He also mentioned to him the study that was apparently done that said in 50 years there'd be no mule deer in Wyoming because of CWD, and his response was that it hadn't been published.
Well, the reality is, if you look at just the drivers, and if this disease continues on and the predictive models, there'll probably be deer on the landscape, but you might have 5 deer per square mile, and they're not going to live to an older age, you know, because you're going to get ingress from other areas that might not be infected, but in your heavily infected areas, you're just not going to see a thriving population. And the predictive models actually show that, you know, we're seeing this decline in some of these areas, and you might see a spike again. But basically, that spike is never going to come back. They're never going to rebound back to the levels that they are. They already, this resistant gene that everybody's talking about, they've already seen a shift in those heavily infected populations to that genotype, and they're still seeing declines. So, you know, it basically, when it comes down to it, is trying to predict 50 years out. It's anyone's guess, would be the ultimate answer. But based on what we've seen and based on the progression of this disease and the permanence on the landscape, it's not a good scenario.
He also said there was a test for live cervids where they pull a tooth. Are you familiar with such a test?
A tooth, or are you talking about there is a test where they take a tonsil?
No, something within their mouth.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
He's supposed to send me the information on
like I say, that'd be a new one on me, because what they've looked at so far, and I worked on several projects prior to coming to Tennessee where we were testing live animals. At that time, we were using tonsils. And then there's also been work that's been looked at in elk and mule deer using lymph node, basically, that exists right around the anus. And you can take that in a live animal. But those tests aren't always 100%, and it's not been proven accurate. This tooth thing is news to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Box.
I just want to concur with Commissioner Holbert. I was able to attend the meeting with Commissioner Cox, and it was phenomenal. I couldn't believe the number of agency employees were there. It was unbelievable, and y'all did a phenomenal job. It was great. Good turnout. I think the public was very appreciative of it. So thank y'all. I know that was a lot of work. I appreciate that. One statement that was made that night, I just want to make sure I clarify that the prions are at 1,800 degrees in an incinerator, it does kill it, or is that not? I thought I heard that statement that night. I was just making sure.
If you want to get precise, it's 1,000 degrees Celsius,
Okay.
and which is approximately 1,834 degrees Fahrenheit. So
that does.
Yeah, that'll destroy it. There's also chemical denaturing.
Okay.
The sanitizing process that we actually use in the field is 50% bleach solution, which when you stop and consider, most household cleaners are a 1% bleach solution, and we're 50 times stronger than that. And so it doesn't actually destroy the prion necessarily, but it makes it not infective. And so there is chemical denaturing, but on a commercial scale, that's not available. So incineration to destroy the prion is the only thing really that's commercially available.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Commissioner McLaren.
Can you give me the rundown, excuse me, the rundown of from the time that they contract CWD until we see clinical signs in the field that we look at it and say, oh, that deer's infected?
In terms of how it proceeds through the body, or
the timeline?
So say like an animal was infected January 1 of this year. Within the first month that the disease is it depends on if it's an infectious dose and how much they actually ingested. But basically during that first month, it's spreading through the lymphatic system. Ultimately, it'll, over the long term through that, we can start detecting it at about 1 month post-infection. Practically, and that's based on research studies in captivity. Practically, though, we're probably only able to get it at about 4 months post-infection for a wild animal. And so during that time period, it's just spreading through the animal. It does at some point in time become spread in the blood after it passes out of the lymphatic system. And from that point in time, anywhere the blood goes, the prions can be deposited. It finds a tissue that can basically reproduce it, starts reproducing in it. Primarily, that's the neurologic tissue. And then within that 10 to 18 month period, post-infection is when we actually will start to see, and a lot of this, unfortunately, is based on they know the animal is infected. We're watching it in a lab. We're specifically looking every day for clinical changes. So practically on the landscape for wildlife purposes, like actually out on the landscape, it's going to be beyond that 10-month period unless they received a huge infectious dose or they were extremely susceptible to the disease and it spread really fast. But as the holes in the brain develop, that's when you start seeing those clinical signs. And so that's going to be, basically they lose the drive to eat. And when they lose the drive to eat, that's when they start to kind of starve. And so that's when you start getting thinner, and that's when you get that poor hair coat. And then also, like when it gets further on down the line and more of the brain tissue is consumed with the prion and more brain tissue dies, that's when you start seeing the circling or the abnormal drooling or, aware of people. They kind of act blind. So
the total process might be 2 years?
Upwards of 2 years, depending on original infectious dose and, how quickly it spreads in that animal, all kinds of different factors. The level of nutrition that animal had to begin with, is it fighting other diseases, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Commissioner Strail?
Yeah, Chuck, for us, for me, but for us, you're talking about it and you're describing it. What I would like for you to do, please, if you have time, is on our next meeting, I'd like to see some footage, if there's a such thing, of the actual deer and what they look like and how they act and so forth. Stills of maybe, the way it goes through the process. But I would like to see if they're circling and doing things like that. We all hunt. I would love to be able to look at that and be able to determine if we see something and educate us in a little bit better way, the commission here, so that we can see it. But a description, I'm just not that smart. I'd like to see something visual. If you can look that up or help us with that, maybe next month.
Yeah, I'd Yeah, I'll certainly try. That's a great idea. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
suggesting that.
Commissioner Cox?
Chuck or Dr. Grove, either one. Do we know what Mississippi's doing as far as sampling? You touched on it earlier, I think, but do we know what their efforts are when you guys talk to them?
I certainly can't describe them in detail at this point because there hadn't been the opportunity for coordination in these first days. But we do have we're planning a meeting with them soon to get on the same page for sure. However, they are mostly relying on a freezer program, as folks tend to be referring to it as. So in the counties where they have concerns, they have those available for hunters to submit sampling. So they're doing intensive sampling, and they're much like us. It's daily they're getting new results and trying to get a handle on prevalence and spatial distribution, just like we are in order to develop their long-term strategy, which will be in cooperation with us.
Have they found more positives?
Yes, sir.
How many? What are they up to?
I'm hearing 6 behind me, so that seems about right for me, or from what I understand. But they are picking up some additional positives in that Marshall County, that county that's just south of us.
Okay, Shelby County, for the record and for people that might be watching or that will go back and watch, do you still need more animals tested in Shelby County? Have you gotten all you need, or do you think in the next 2 weeks hunters need to step it up?
If you look at the way the surveillance plan was originally set up, it's no different now that Shelby County is a border county to those 2 counties in terms of its risk level, because that risk level in Shelby was already elevated because of the Mississippi situation. And so we're actually above what our original goal was for there. But always we encourage, if people see sick or dying animals and things like that, I would anticipate that we're going to we already have up our roadkill numbers in that area as well, if that is a potential. And then, I'm always of the opinion if we can get a few more samples, it gives us a little bit better idea. But I just want to stress that we have met surveillance goals in that county, and we've actually exceeded them. So we do have a measurable amount of samples that we can make a decision based off of. But there, might be the need in the future to get more samples through certain avenues, basically.
All right, don't go away. I got another question for you. But Chuck, what communication and getting the word out seems to be an issue that you've been dealing with and having trouble with. Are we using email?
Yes, sir.
I haven't gotten an email on unless I missed it, on updates on CWD, and I know we've got a lot of them. Are we using that email blast?
Yes, sir. We are now, and when I say we, our communication staff are sending out a weekly update to all the subscribers. So it just be as simple as making sure that you're a subscriber, and we can help you with that.
Okay. A subscriber to what? You mean just providing it to the agency, or subscribing to the CWD updates?
Yeah, there's exactly the latter.
Why would we not use the emails that we've gotten from hunting licenses? What if people don't know to sign up for updates for CWD on an email? Why wouldn't we use our entire book of emails? Is that a conscious decision? Obviously it's a conscious decision, but
yeah,
maybe send out an email notifying everybody that the CWD email is available.
Yeah, I believe we're doing both. I'm
Okay.
afraid to say with absolute certainty, but I'll
Okay.
defer to our communications chief, who is coming this way, thankfully.
Jennifer, if you will, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wisniewski. I'm the new Chief of Communications and Outreach, and I'd love to address your question, Mr. Cox. So we did our press release blast, and then I signed the commission up to receive CWD updates, so I'd encourage you to check maybe your spam folder.
Okay.
Sometimes they get stuck in there. But we did do a big blast to ask people to sign up for this. And we've driven over 75,000 people now to our CWD in Tennessee webpage, where we're also asking them to sign up for updates on that website.
Okay, so the communication is not as, I mean, you think it's doing well?
We are, between the public meeting, the weekly communications, the last one was sent out on the 8th of January, so you haven't gotten anything since the 8th. So I think that they're going fairly well.
All right, good. Last and probably the hardest question. I've been getting calls, because this is my area, from a lot of hunters that Dr. Grove, and I'm not sure how to exactly ask this, but based on your best guess, I'll say, and based on what other states' experience has been, the ones that have followed their plan or the plan that has been most effective, what does Tennessee deer hunting look like in 20 years?
Well,
hunters are nervous, landowners are nervous, hunting leases are nervous. They want to know transparency, honesty. What do you think we're looking at?
Ultimately, like I mentioned in the presentation, I don't think we're going to be able to prevent a shift in age structure. I think that's just as there's more and more infected animals on the landscape, whether it stays at the percentage that it's at now or increases, that's just going to naturally occur. It just depends on how fast that's going to occur. In terms of spread outside of the area, that's what our goal is, to prevent that from occurring. And then if we can decrease the interactions on the landscape, we might be able to hold the prevalence at a certain level. Keep in mind, some of those techniques that have been used were used before this level of infection was already reached. And so I don't have a good answer for you 100% on that at this point in time, because we're still trying to collect the information, and every day our prevalence is shifting up and down based on the samples that we're getting back, as well as this. You can see the spatial distribution just in this last week has increased. And so what our abilities are going to be to manage that is going to depend on where that final number sits for prevalence when we get done at the end of the season, as well as what the final distribution setup is.
So reducing deer interactions is code for we need to reduce the population, probably.
More than likely in certain areas. We had this discussion. There's not a set number. I mean, that was one of the questions actually that was asked in Bolivar. Unfortunately, with all the research that's been done for management, there's not a set number of deer per square mile that you're trying to achieve. But what we do know is at above a certain number, what happens whenever the deer population is above a certain number. And so there's been plenty of states that we know what the spread is like at certain levels of deer on the landscape. And so ultimately what we got to do is take all of the stuff in play that we have and all the other things that are occurring on the landscape and figure out what we need to do to make sure that we're below those kind of numbers. So whether it's primarily, we would prefer to do that through hunter harvest. If we can't reach it through hunter harvest, we might have to look at other means. There is a lot of deer depredation permits that are issued in the area. So there's a lot of animals that are being removed from the landscape as part of deer depredation. And so there's a lot of things that have to be factored in. And until we actually have all the data from the season, I would just be guessing to say what the final plan looks like for the next 5 years.
Thank you. And I'll echo what Commissioner Holbert said. I think the staff and you guys have done a fabulous job. Thank you.
Commissioner King.
I have two questions. One of them being the two new counties, so will the hunting will be extended there too? That'll come under just like the three original counties? So Shelby, you'll have an extended season, no?
So you're right. Okay, and just to be sure, I'm a little confused by the way you phrased the question, but you're asking about will the new season apply to Shelby County?
Correct.
Not without further action.
Oh, okay. That's number one. Number two, now this is probably have no answer for me, but I'm just thinking about the three different prion diseases you're talking about: mad cow disease, and then the human and the CWD. So in cattle, when they had it like in Canada or wherever, even here, they wiped out the herd and it was no longer in the environment. Why is that prion a different? It's just different than the. They didn't get it back. It's not back in our herds. In other words, they don't say it's permanent.
Yeah, it depends on the level that it already existed on those properties. If you look at scrapie work that was done from back in the 40s and 50s before they shifted their scrapie surveillance program, which is the one in sheep and goats.
Yes.
They on the prion, CWD prion acts a little bit more like the scrapie prion in the environment, and then there's places where they're still throwing sheep back in that aren't the quote-unquote resistant sheep because they were able to breed those kind of sheep. When they throw them back into those places, they're getting infected again, and that's like 30, 40 years after the fact. So there's been some long-term work with other diseases. Every prion is slightly different. That's why BSE, which is the mad cow one, is considered highly infectious to people, and even with that, there's a 5 to 10 year lag period between point of consumption of infected meat until they actually develop clinical disease, and they saw that in England whenever the outbreak actually occurred in the early 80s, and they didn't start seeing people come down with the disease until the late 80s, early 90s. And so every prion's a little bit different in the way it interacts on the landscape.
So the CJD is not necessarily from eating. I mean, do they know how the CJD comes out? Because I know it's like, what, 300 people in the United States right now that
So there's different forms of the human form, and there's actually different forms in the animal. Some of the forms that actually, what you're referring to, because it was Canada and Alberta and places like that, there's what's called variant, which means they got it from another animal's prion, so like a scrapie prion. Okay. And then there's also familial or genetic, where it's an older animal, it develops it, and typically those aren't actually infectious to other animals. Like if it's a genetic form of it, they typically aren't infectious to other animals, and so that's part of the environmental contamination. In the human side of the disease, again, I'm not a human doctor, but ultimately there's the same forms that exist. There's what's called CJD variant, and that's the one that people get from mad cow. There's a familial form, there's a fatal insomnia form, there's multiple forms of the disease. The ones that people are seeing in the United States, the CDC is looking into those. They take an extensive history on anybody that turns up positive with the disease, because they're trying to prove a causal link with any number of other prion diseases. We know that in humans there has been transfer through organ transplants and things like that. So it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but you know the way the diseases themselves act within the animal is pretty much similar.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Swan.
Dr. Groves, has there been any instances of any cattle, sheep, deer that are immune to?
After that program was instituted, the population is a lot different than trying to actually do it within a captive population, which they did within the sheep industry. But now there's new forms of the scrapie prion. So basically you expose enough animals to a disease, you're eventually going to get that disease to convert to where it's infectious.
You being a scientist, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what do you see in the cervid population, say in the U.S. in these areas?
You know, in all honesty, I don't even know how to predict that, because where we are now, I wouldn't have guessed we would have been 20 years ago. So, I mean, that's just my honest answer is we're going to still continue to try and do our best based on the best available science. But long term, you know, if it continues with what we already have seen, it's going to probably be a similar scenario as to what other states have seen. So.
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Grove, on the map when you showed how many tests were conducted per county, and then you had the positives on there. If I understood Chuck right, do you not find out the location of the harvest until after a positive has been identified?
I can answer that.
Okay.
Unless you want Chuck
okay,
to answer it.
No,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Basically, well, before it was just one person was calling everybody and finding the locations, but the short answer to your question is we don't have the location information other than county level until it comes back as positive. Right now, in the future, we might have a better mechanism for getting that sooner on. But right now, the method is we're calling the hunter and letting them know. It's part of communication with the hunter too, because we want to call them and let them know directly versus send them a blanket email. Hey, you had a positive. It gives us more information and enables us to answer those questions. So right now, there's 5 or 6 staff that are dedicated to whenever we get these positives back, they're calling and trying to get in touch with these hunters as best as we can.
Yeah, and I know y'all are swamped, and I admire the job that y'all have done to try to get a handle on this. But once you get your feet underneath you, and let's hope that happens soon, to where it slows down a little bit, where you can plan a little further ahead. It seems like there'd be some value in the deer that you test that come back negative, and having locations on all of that so that you could further define the area within the county, perhaps that is the most crucial or most infected. It would be just an interesting stat to see in a slide to see, from my perspective, to see, like, because I didn't see any like north of Highway 64. No positives. And I'm curious how many got tested north of Highway 64, but we don't really know that.
Not at this point in time, we don't.
Right.
But that is something that has been discussed, and especially for the bordering counties to know if all the samples came from the north end of the county. It's something that we potentially will be able to look at. It's a lot of samples, or a lot of people trying to get in touch with. But
I know y'all are under, and I appreciate it. But I mean, eventually, boy, it should be nice to try to just really narrow that down as much as we could. But that's for later on when hopefully we
have more time, more stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so and then Chuck, you said the testing at the check station is not mandatory. Did you have anybody that wouldn't let you test their deer? That you know of?
The only instance that I can think of would be if somebody had a deer they wanted to mount, and in some cases they did not provide a sample. However, apparently most of those cases, those hunters went on to a taxidermist or a processor, and in that interaction they wound up getting the samples or getting us access to those samples. So we're batting about 1,000 on getting those.
Okay, I was just curious if anybody would not want that, 'cause, if they were going to consume the meat, it would just seem like it's an obvious choice that you would like your deer tested.
It's possible, but so far it hadn't been an issue.
Thank you. Thanks for
Chairman,
what you're doing.
So, Commissioner King, I'm not sure, you raised the question about cattle and when they have a positive, that's what you were asking, correct? Well, yeah, I think it's a pertinent discussion as to how this industry manages it. So I just wanted, for accuracy and clarification, just to have a response as to what the cattle industry does when they have a positive.
I'm certainly not prepared for that. Is that something you can help with? Or? Okay.
Being able to deal with that's a little bit easier than if you look on the map now. We're pretty much the majority of 2 counties, which on the back of the napkin kind of math was approximately 20,000 square miles. Whenever you stop and look at it, if you include the Mississippi portion. So to kind of go in and try and do a wholesale, let's do what the domestic industry does, it's impossible. And then you've also created a vacuum where animals are going to move back into that area. So if you can kind of create a stable population of animals, because we know deer biology, and using deer biology, matriarchal units, they usually follow basically the oldest doe of a particular group. If you can somewhat maintain that but decrease the number of those units that are on the landscape, you can prevent other animals from coming in potentially. So it's basically trying to create this homeostasis between disease and maintaining animals on the landscape.
I thought it was important to get that out because
Okay, Commissioner Sanders.
A couple just quick questions. If it's 10 to 18 months to clinical, it's pretty obvious that we've consumed some CWD deer in Tennessee, even if it's the 4-month number. There seems to be a lot of confusion out there on the statement that there is no known case of human contracting anything from a CWD deer. However, the CDC says don't eat the contaminated deer. So I don't know if maybe we can clarify that so there's not, I've just, in reading it's just pretty, people are all over the place on this. And if the CDC says you shouldn't eat it, then maybe we need to make that statement a little more clear. This is what the CDC says, this is why they say it. Yes, we know deer's been consumed all over the country since the 60s. We get it. But this is why, because there just seems to be a lot of confusion on that. So, and
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to respond a little on that. We're falling back on the CDC's language, and then just encouraging folks that it's their choice. And you know, the talking points are that in an area that has chronic wasting disease, you ought to have your deer tested, and if it tests positive, then you shouldn't consume it. But in the end, it's their choice. And we just need to say that every chance we get, because I don't think that's confusing. It's not as clear as we would all like it to be, but that's pretty good guidance, and that just needs to be the message.
have you come up with a public way to test, or is it still confined to the hot spot, for lack of better words?
Yeah, there's avenues for testing, and you know, as you saw, we're doing that constantly.
I know we're testing, but if I'm a hunter and I take one and I want to have it tested, can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can either do it through our programs, or that's, you know, every hunter has the ability to do that on their own.
And then the final thing, we went from like 0 to 63 in a very quick amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, have we, or are we going to look at our pre-CWD area testing to see if there was a miss in this area, or if there was a miss, I'm not saying there was, but to go from 0 to 63 so quick, and I think all of us were pretty shocked, even you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that maybe we can alter in our looking to make sure that we're staying ahead of it, maybe better than reacting to it?
How many samples did you want from Shelby County originally? How many have you gotten? How many did you want?
Well, we've got, I believe, 90 from Shelby County this year, and that met our goal there.
But it's now part of the hot zone. Wouldn't you want 300? Why would it not be treated just like McNairy County now? Why wouldn't we extend the season now to allow hunters? I thought it was automatic, to tell you the truth. Why wouldn't we extend the season now to allow to get 300 samples so we can be sure?
Commissioner Cox, this is brand new information, and there's ongoing discussions within the agency, and it possibly we could have some recommendations tomorrow.
Okay.
So this is ongoing. I'm not saying we will, but this is all brand new information right now.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Please, and I will say that we limit comments to 2 minutes. Thank you.
I don't know if this is on or not. I don't know how to turn it on. All right.
If you would, state your name,
yeah,
please.
my name is Nick Craft, and I'm a chemical engineer and a consultant to industry. But more importantly, I guess I'm a stakeholder in primarily Haywood County, deer hunter, been practicing quality deer management for over a decade. I'm extremely thankful that this response plan was in place. It shows forethought, shows determination in planning. It really is proven to be very, very productive and worthwhile. I'm also very, very thankful for the field work I've seen these guys put in. I've been to some of the check stations. I've been around, called in road kills, and everybody's giving it everything. There's going to be a new normal. It's going to be a long-term new normal. And so I just had one question was, and as I understand it, the risk-based surveillance, and just looking personally at Haywood County or Shelby County, some of the adjacent counties, some of them got a pretty good dose of testing in 16, 17, and in 17, 18. So we already had some confidence there with non-detects in those counties. Going forward on risk-based surveillance for spatial distribution, will this be a dynamic plan? In other words, now that we have a good number of positives, will the adjacent counties now be treated as if they had a state next door that had extremely big number of policies? Is the surveillance sampling for spatial distribution, is it a dynamic model? Does it change year to year with different goals for each county?
I'm going to defer to make sure it's appropriate to answer.
It is appropriate, but I'll definitely go ahead and answer it that it is a dynamic program. I've seen it, or model, but go ahead, Chuck, and you can short answer that.
Yeah. Yes, sir. The plan is adaptive, and we will adapt. And one thing that will be constant, though, in our surveillance is that we'll continue it in areas where it's not known to exist to detect it early, and in areas where we find it, then we're going to hone in there and make sure we understand prevalence and spatial distribution and be able to measure the impact that we're having through our management actions. And there will be special interest in surrounding counties.
Okay. Along those lines, if I could just suggest, when this January special season ends, it appears to me that there's going to be a real need for interested parties, stakeholders, and the public to report road kills, for the agency to get on those and get samples of road kills, and also reports of deer acting strangely, because that's going to be our data in between what we have right now. So if we could make an effort to get stakeholders and encourage people to get on that, and of course it's going to take some agency resources to respond and get a sample. I'm doing it myself. If I'm looking at the roadside. And I would compliment this too. The work that's gone into this made it extremely convenient for hunters in these three counties. In Mississippi, they do have drop-off, but they are pretty scattered, and I know there are 3 positives in Marshall County, Mississippi, but it's not near as convenient for a hunter there to get their sampling done and to get it as part of our data. But I look forward to cooperation with Mississippi officials as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? If not, thank you, Chuck and Dr. Groves. That concludes the business of the Wildlife Committee, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert, and I'd like to reiterate what several folks have said about the all hands on deck approach. That first week there was very little sleep that happened throughout the entire agency. As wildlife, administration, legal, law enforcement, communications, everybody was giving it their best effort, as Commissioner Holbert has said so well. So thank y'all very much again for that. I was proud of being associated with this agency, but especially proud after seeing how that response and how dedicated folks are. So our hunters are in good hands with this team. So thank you for that. Do y'all want to take a quick break or want to keep going? How are we doing? Let's just keep going then. And so I'd like to. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Excuse yourself is needed. I'd like to recognize Chairman Woodson of the Fisheries Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to recognize Frank Fiss.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. At the last commission meeting, our Assistant Chief Jason Henniger gave an update, or actually a preview of some important rule changes that we need to make to the fish dealer's license. And in that conversation, we realized we need to step back and explain what the fish dealer license is, what activities are involved, to answer some questions that the commission raised last month. So The fish dealer's license has been around for a long time. I talked to one of the earlier chiefs and from the 80s, and he remembered it well when he was during his tenure. The only thing that has changed over the years is that this license that works on it is required for bait dealers, fish farming, and catch-out operations or pay lakes. The only thing that's changed is for some time these were separate licenses. At least the bait dealers was split out. And in the late 90s, they were combined into one license for all three activities. It kind of makes sense to combine these because all these activities have one thing in common: they're selling live fish. The only other license holders that we have that can sell live fish would be commercial fishermen. So your sport fishermen could not sell these fish. Let's see. The money involved, the resident fish dealers would be charged $62, non-residents $610, and the total revenue to the agency varies, but it's between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. Just a quick definition of who bait dealers are. They're the predominant purchaser of the fish dealer license, and there's about 200 of them. These are the people that sell fish as bait, and they're also allowed to harvest some species from the wild for bait. And we've been through the bait proclamation many times of what they can do and not. The other activity is fish farming. There's only 9 fish farmers in the state that 9 companies or people purchase this fish dealer's license to fish farm. And these are private hatcheries that rear fish and other aquatic life for sale. So pretty common species: trout, catfish, and that's pretty much most of them. So there's not a lot of that going on. And likewise with the catch-out operations or pay lakes, we've estimated that there's about 12 of them total. We had our assistant call all of the people that hold a fish dealer license in the last couple of weeks. So we've kind of done a census of all the people that hold these licenses. The catch-out operations are the ones that raised the most questions at the last meeting. These are places where customers pay to fish the lake, and they can buy the fish that they catch. And in Tennessee, the customers do not need a fishing license if they show up at a pay lake. And these pay lakes are limited to what fish they can offer. That has to be trout, catfish, or common carp, and right now some other non-game fishes. The new rule that we'll be proposing at some point in the future is going to limit it to just those species of trout, catfish, and common carp. And lastly, the fish that are provided in a pay lake situation must be reared on site, purchased from a fish farm, or purchased from a commercial fisher. You couldn't use a typical farm pond as a pay lake. It's got bass, bluegill in it. You can't, because of the species, you wouldn't be able to do that. So just to generally describe the catch-out operations, I looked at some of the websites for a few of them that I found in Tennessee. It's very common that they have a strong family fishing component to these programs. When I did a lot more time on the phones in the fisheries office answering cold calls from the public, it was really common to get calls from people to say, look, I want to take a kid fishing, and I want to know where a catfish farm is where I know I can put this kid on fish immediately. And these are the kind of places that we send them to. A lot of these catch-out operations they don't seem like, to me, they don't seem to be very large operations. They're often combined with other activities, like this one here. You can come see the peach orchard, maybe pick your own peaches, and they've also got this catfish pond thing. Others will have camping opportunities for the family. And this is the one for Twin Lakes Catfish Farm near Baxter, Tennessee. I mean, they're promoting this as a family fun event. So the question was, how does Tennessee compare to other states, particularly with who needs a license to operate and to participate at a pay lake? Those were the 2 questions last month. So we called and looked into the surrounding states, like we always do, and a few others too: Texas, Florida, Indiana, and Ohio. So first question: do they have pay lakes? Yes. every state that I've ever known of has had pay lakes in them. Our operator's license is required. About half of the states that we talked to did not require any kind of licensure from the owner operator of the lake. The people that the states that do charge, they have varying charge structures. Tennessee's 62 for resident, 610 for non-resident. Kentucky has different pricing depending on whether or not the fish are farm-raised fish or fish that are brought in from the wild and then used in this operation. Georgia has an optional license, and if you opt in with the license, then your clients don't need to have a fishing license. That's how they handle that. And Florida was kind of unique in that they scaled their charge by acreage. So but again, half of the states that we talked to did not even have a license requirement. Now, what about the anglers that show up to fish on these lakes? Almost every state did not require a license except for Mississippi. And there's actually one more state, we talked to West Virginia, and they didn't require it. So Mississippi is the only state in the southeast that requires that, and we are with the majority on not requiring an angler's license at a pay lake operation. So the recommended next steps for this fish dealer's license, and particularly with the pay lakes, would be to continue our licensing structure as we have it in TCA, which outlines, it explicitly says in TCA that the pay lake operator has to have this fish dealer's license, and that the people that come to fish said pay lake do not have to have a license. And again, we need to file the amendments that Jason presented last month for the fish dealer rule, so that we can get some really important changes made to how particularly the fish farming and the pay lakes are operated, because we're more concerned about what species are in those lakes than we are the actual administration of the licensing. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from members of the commission on this? Thank you for the follow-up. It's very helpful, and we were talking earlier, since we have an evolving membership of the commission in the next few months, these are really important institutional bits of information that we just don't necessarily have if we've not been around for a while. So thank you for the information. We really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Great. With that, I'll turn it back to the chairman.
Perfect timing. I'd like to
Stretched it out.
Yeah, right. I'd like to recognize Chairman Cox.
Well, he had to go cook, so I'm going to take over for him, and I want to recognize Michael May, and Michael's going to be talking about our new mobile app upgrade. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chairman, Commission. Real quick, before I bring up our rock star Jennifer Wisniewski, the Chief of our new Outreach and Communications Division, I'll give you a little bit of a play-by-play of what we've done with the mobile app over the years, real quick background. So about 7 years ago, we started the overall development of the mobile app, and about a year after that, it went live with our version 3.1 with great success. And we did that with One Click Outdoors, the company One Click Outdoors. And then we went into a contract with them, a 5-year contract that was $100,000 for 5 years, $20,000 a year. And that $20,000 a year was comprised of doing upgrades to it, updates, and keeping it maintained throughout that life cycle. And then about a year ago, we went into negotiations with Brandt, who manages our license system. And we were able to negotiate an amendment to that contract for them to do our mobile app for no charge for the life of that Brandt contract. So with this new version that they've started building, is a 3.0 for us, and we were completely collaborative inside the agency with all the different divisions: IT, licensing, GIS, boating, fisheries, wildlife, I&E, regional offices, and many more, to come up with what we have here today. And a lot of the information and the collaborative function was including Brandt and their team as well. So we now have a 3.0 version, and I'd like for Jennifer, please, as a committee or commission, to bring her up and talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so
if everybody has their phone, you can feel free to get it out and go to the App Store or go to the Play Store and download the app. 117,000 people have done so far in our rollout, so that's pretty good. We'll get even more when turkey season heats up. You'll be able to do new things. So you can store your license now on your phone. You can store your whole family's licenses on your phone. So you can go totally paper-free, and it's all right there. That's all you need. And you can also do game check with or without cell phone service. So if you are in the woods where sometimes there is no cell phone service, you can still check your game, whether that's turkey or deer, whatever, and it will ping as soon as you get back into service, and you'll still have a confirmation number on your phone. You also get sunrise sunset times for your exact location, so you can kind of pinpoint down and know exactly where you are and what time the sun's going to set on you. And then it's still got the same great features as before. You can access the regulations, you can follow us on any of our social media, you can buy fishing licenses, hunting licenses, see all of the great toolbox kind of details, and we really love this new app. So it's short, it's sweet, it's an app for any and all things R3. We'll be able to do push notifications and all of those types of things through the app as well. So any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, does this store your information so you don't have to log in every
Yes.
time you report a harvest?
You just have to hit sync, and it'll sync if you've had any harvests. So you'll just go into your license and hit sync.
So you don't have to go in and put in your social.
No social, no name. You just click on, whatever you store your license as. Click on, Mr. Swan, and go in there, and you can hit sync, and it'll sync all your harvests. Any others?
I got one thing that would be nice. Can we get some, like the hunting guides, can they be cached or something where they're stored on my phone?
Yes, so
That's the one thing that, to me, is different with the new one, that's a little more troublesome.
That is in the works. So again, next version, this is kind of a mid version, but coming with the new RFP for the hunting guide and the fishing guide, there'll be a web, a mobile-friendly version so that then you can also store it. So yes, that's coming. Any others?
More questions?
I just have
Go ahead,
one
Dennis.
comment, and that's, thank you for putting my sunrise sunset back there. I missed it when it quit working on the older app, and it sure is handy. That way I know when I have to quit looking for ducks.
Any other questions or comments?
One for, it's not for you, Jennifer, for Bobby Wilson. You think they could put a map on there so if people got lost? Like certain commissioners had trouble, it could guide them out? How to read a map, that may be it, yes. Thank you.
That was rude, Bobby. Anybody else? Jennifer? You good? Everybody good? Mr. Jeff,
Thank
I'm
you,
done.
Commissioner Stroud. And that completes our business for today. Are there any comments from the commission?
As far as I can figure, if there's nothing else, I'd like to make a motion we adjourn.
Hang on just a second. So, Director Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Woods, I'll be as quick as I can. That's first of all, I want to echo all the things were said about the agency response on CWD. It's I'm so proud of the people in this agency, and not only in CWD, all the programs that you've seen. But I think I told some of you I went to the Archery Trades Association meeting last week. There were some 10,000 people there and 600 exhibitors, and many of them came up and said, we've been looking at Tennessee, and we're holding it up as a state who was ready for CWD when it hit. So I took that as a great compliment to the people in this agency, and I know they're going to keep that going as well. Also, I think Dave Kostersky may have already left, but I just want to publicly thank Dave for taking the time to come down from Canada and visit with us. the Canadians have really stepped up in terms of our Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. We have all but 3 of the Canadian provinces now as a part of the association, and we also have the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. So it's been really good in that respect. Then I also wanted you probably to extend sympathy to 2 of our employees, that being Joe Benedict and Jamie Feddersen. They both moved from Florida to get away from the dictatorial director they had down there. And they wound up and they have a whole new career going, and he follows them. So he decides to come to Tennessee. So you didn't get to meet Nick while he was Nick, make sure everybody knew. Nick was the director in Florida, and we became really good friends several years ago and have stayed that way, I think, maybe until today. But anyway, Nick is now the Chief Conservation Officer for Ducks Unlimited, and that's why he came to Tennessee, and has done a great job. He was in strong consideration for the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and as that went forward, Nick decided the best thing for he and his family were not moving to D.C., but to move to Tennessee, and I'm so glad that he did. But he has a reputation for all the places he's gone. He is known as Captain Sunshine. And everywhere you go, they'll talk Captain Sunshine, and that's a name that's followed him everywhere he goes. And it's because we've been in some really contentious meetings, and then even when he's getting ready to hang somebody, he'll tell them how much he loves them before he gets ready to do that. But when he was president of AFA 3 years ago, the hurricane had hit, and he broke his leg all the same time. So he was at home and couldn't make the meeting, and we wanted to honor Nick some way as being Captain Sunshine. And we've been able to figure out how to do that, and the Tennessee folks kind of put together, you had so much gloom and doom. I wanted to show you this little video that represents Captain Sunshine. So I need to keep talking. Well, I want to, come on, Nick. Yeah, but his wife, Nick and Evelyn, and their 2 boys, one of the boys is still in Florida, but Nick had an okay career in Florida before he came here. Nick.
Well, hey, I'm honored to have y'all here, and 30 years in Florida. State Fish and Wildlife Agencies are where my heart is, and y'all have got a great one in spite of your director. I really do love this man. Even that's Captain Sunshine coming out, I guess. But yeah, my wife's a native Tennessean, so she's a lot of family here, a lot of connections. We're loving it here. Yesterday was 1 year in Tennessee with Ducks Unlimited, and I'm looking. Maybe I can get 29 more here. Who knows? But thank y'all for being here. It's really been a pleasure having you. And I know you're dealing with some serious issues, and I am impressed with how your team and the commissions handle it. So thank you.
One other thing about tonight, I know you have a function tonight. If those of you who plan to ride the vans to that function, we want to meet at 5:45 in front of the hotel. That's our planned departure time to get you there and back on time. And are we good to go yet?
Can you black the screen? Okay, we're good.
It's not working.
While he's doing it, I'll tell you I've never seen Nick get upset. Well, yes, I have, but not too many times. But in a restaurant one night, you get the oysters, and they get through with them, and there's nothing but ice water left. That's when he was sitting there with his leg propped up because it was broken. They poured the whole thing down his back. That was about, and he stunk really bad after that. But other than that,
Can you bring up the PC, Todd?
Nick Wiley was elected to be our president and represent these AFWA folks most everywhere he went. Some meetings were kind of heated and others went just fine. But when the votes were close, they'd get a dose of old Captain Sunshine. Hey Nick, why do you meet? How do you build consensus? How do you handle folks who seem to lose their senses? Over and over, when they get out of line. They never learn, they get burned from Captain Sunshine. Everybody talks about the weather, and this time it's to blame. 'Cause it's kind of gloom, Nick ain't in the room due to Irma, the hurricane. Hey Nick, why do you meet? How do you build consensus? How do you handle folks who seem to lose their senses? Over and over, when they got out of line, they never learned that they'd get burned from Captain Sunshine. Yeah, we live in better days when basking in the rays of Captain Sunshine.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Man, that's hard to beat. So, well, again, I'd like to thank the Ducks Unlimited folks. It's been an incredible facility, and look forward to seeing you here again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So we are adjourned. Thank you.